We're going to get Chief. We're going to get started.
Just asking for
Yeah,
some new stuff.
I know. That's why another bear cat.
Already starting.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. Wanted to, before we get into the business of the evening, wanted to just ask everyone to take a moment of silence in honor and respect for today, the day that, of course, the country will never forget, 9/11. We don't normally do this in study sessions, but I asked the flag to be brought in, so we'll stand and do the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm glad there's no Broncos here that take the knee.
Stay in the topic. So begins really the first of two evenings we've been looking forward to since we did this last year. The budget. A couple of things, and Mark will do a more extensive intro to the budget, but this is obviously, I think, the most important decision that the council makes. This is really what guides the city for the next year. And obviously, as we know, so many things that are going on, so many things that we want to do, so many things that we are doing. It's all dependent on the budget. And really appreciate having all the directors here tonight. I realize you guys have put in a long day already, and you're here for a long night, and we'll have one tomorrow too. But it's really is very much, I think, a symbol of the unity of the importance of what we're doing here, and the fact that you guys, this is not a budget based on individual departments. This is a budget based on the leaders of the city, the leaders of our administrative staff getting together and working through all the issues that you guys deal with that we don't deal with, all the things that you have to manage through on the budget, and coming together with a recommendation that is supported by all of you. And I think that's always been, since we started doing this style budget, I thought that's always really been something that has helped the council to feel comfortable with the recommendations and to also really have a lot greater understanding of where your asks come from and how they're interrelated to each other. So I really appreciate that. I'm going to go through a little bit of one, and I will repeat this when Karina gets here. Oftentimes, council we may have a lot of questions. We have council members who haven't been through a budget yet, and so there may be a lot of questions. There may be some things that we could dive into a lot deeper. Out of respect for the amount of time that this will take us and just the brain power that we're using, we will start a parking lot, and I think Kelly's going to scribe it for us on the whiteboard, and it will also be, I think Sam is going to keep a good record of it too, that if there's an issue that we're getting a little deep on and there's still some unsettled questions, we'll put that up on the parking lot, and then we will revisit that. We do have another study session in 2 weeks where we bring back some cleanup of the budget, and so we can bring those items back then. We ratify this in October, I believe.
First reading is October, yes.
Okay, so what we're doing tonight is not a ratification. It is simply moving it forward for a recommendation for the first and second reading. So just to keep ourselves under control in terms of questions and answers. We want to get the questions answered. We want to make sure that you're comfortable with your decisions. But this is a big room with a lot of work to get done in. So if anybody has any questions or comments about that, we'll put it on the parking lot.
So I mentioned it to Keith already that I just wanted to expand a little bit on the new positions and how they're being paid for.
Okay. So I will turn it over to Mark. Oh, and feel free to help yourself to food, take a break. I don't think we're going to take an official formal break. So it's too hard to get you all rallied back up together and quiet it down. So feel free to handle those things. Mark?
Maybe when Karina gets here, we can just tell her that we've all agreed that we're going to work through the night, so we just do it all in one night.
There you go.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Well, I want to certainly thank the staff, not just the department directors, but all the other staff that works on a budget annually. And it is a pretty significant effort here in any city, but certainly here as well. You know, we've had a series of budget discussions with council kind of leading up to this. So there's a few issues here that you're going to be somewhat familiar with. In the budget message that myself and Tiffany put together here, there's a theme here, certainly. With the fire department leaving this organization and going to South Metro here at the end of the year, it has a significant impact on the city's budget. As the council is aware, we have a contract for 2019 regardless of the outcome of the vote. We're going to talk a little bit more detail about what that really means here financially for the city. We've prepared a budget as if the vote in November is affirmative. We have some documentation that we're going to review with council here on our projections for the general fund specifically over the next 5 years, what that means. We're also going to talk a little bit about what happens if the vote is actually negative and they do not, our citizens do not affirm the inclusion in South Metro. So we also have a financial projection. And as this City Council has already seen that, if that is the case, then we will be coming back to you in the first part of next year to talk about a series of program and service reductions that will just absolutely be necessary in order for us to financially afford that over time. And at the end of 2 years, assuming that we have not had another vote in the affirmative, we will start to have to make reductions in order for us to kind of balance our budget. So we'll talk a little bit more detail about that here over the next couple of days. Now, Tiffany's going to review with you the very detailed kind of agenda here. We've got basically policy questions and the department review here for the next 2 days, and then we've got some mop-up issues here on September 25th. So I would encourage you, this is obviously a study session, and for a few of you, this is perhaps your first municipal budget. Municipal accounting, budgeting is different than perhaps most people are familiar with, so I think any question is just fair. It's an opportunity to kind of understand, how a city budget is prepared. I think the last comment I would make is that it is my intent for us to kind of change our approach here over the next couple of years to kind of work in priority-based budgeting in a much deeper way, so that the council can start to understand what, through the budgeting process, not just a document like this, but also the true cost of our programs and services, so that it's a clear understanding of that. And ultimately, I want to be able to align that all with your goals. So the budget is tied directly to your goals, and it'll be obvious. Performance measures are another topic that we'll probably talk about over time. I think that I have an interest in that, and certainly over time we'll discuss it with council and how we align that with your goals. All that will start probably at the end of January when the council will hopefully at that time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tiffany, and she's going to kind of kick off our budget discussion.
All right, good evening, council. Glad to have you all here and have staff here to support any questions that you might have. I'm primarily going to be doing the presentation this evening, and if there's any specific questions, we have staff here who can help with that. But I'll go ahead and start. So kind of the theme this year is planning for the future. As Mark suggested, we have some hurdles ahead of us related to the fire inclusion. And so that's going to definitely change the way that we're going to budget in 2019 and going forward. So planning for the future is what we're going to be doing this year. Of course, it worked 5 minutes ago. I swear I have the hardest time with this a perfect way to start the evening. I had this problem last week too. Okay, so just real quickly, all of you have the schedule in your budget book. So I'm not going to go over that in detail, but I will mention that I may need a break in the next 4 hours, so we may have a schedule. Essentially, we're going to go over the budget, citywide budget policy questions, and then each individual department. And then same thing, we're going to follow through on Wednesday. We'll talk about some unfunded priorities, some requests that were made by departments that we just unfortunately aren't able to fund in 2019. And then Tuesday, September 25th, originally was optional. However, you see we do have several items listed here, so it is no longer optional, and we will have that budget meeting on the 25th. In addition to the items listed here, we'll also follow up on any parking lot issues that might still be unresolved by Tuesday, the 25th. So we're just going to do an overview. We're going to do the policy questions, talk about the unfunded priorities, and then I'm just going to remind everyone of some revenue options that we've discussed previous budget years. So in July, departments met and they submitted their request for the 2019 budget. We had 2 days, I believe, of meetings that were sometimes intense and deep discussions, but we did make it through, and we have a budget in front of you that we collaboratively came together to present to you. I mentioned planning for the future. So we have the Envision Littleton, the Vision to Comp plan that's going on right now. In January, Council's going to have a workshop to establish additional strategic imperatives and goals. We've talked about priority-based budgeting, and I just want to remind everyone that we will have full implementation of that by the year 2021. You'll see that again throughout this next year. You'll see it in 2020 and definitely in 2021. One thing that we really wanted to do is have 5-year fiscally constrained plans for all our funds. So you've got some in your budget book this year that we have not done in the past related to open space, impact fees, conservation trust fund. So those are new this year, and we're going to continue to update those as needs arise. I mentioned with council previously adoption of the principles of sound financial management. So this is just kind of an update to our financial policies. We did a study session on it early in the year. We're going to bring that forward for approval or adoption by council. And then again, just addressing our long-term financial sustainability, specifically with the change in the fire services. Some impacts in 2019, definitely fire services. Mark mentioned we're going to be contracting with South Metro Fire in 2019. It's going to be an election in 2018. A vote of yes. South Metro Fire will increase the property taxes to Littleton residents, but in turn the City of Littleton will also reduce the property taxes. And we're also going to dedicate $3.1 million annually to capital projects to address the street maintenance and infrastructure issues. A vote of no, the city will have to continue to pay for fire services contracted through South Metro. We'll have to use our general fund reserves. We won't have any additional revenues dedicated to streets and infrastructure, and it could lead to significant cuts to services. I think one of the biggest things that we need to be aware of is by the year 2022, we're definitely going to be nearing our state minimum requirements for reserves that are established by Tabor. The other thing that fire is going to have an impact on that we truly don't know the impact of fire separating from the city is the impact to health, workers' comp, and the property and liability insurances. Ideally, if fire is no longer employed with the City of Littleton, we expect those to definitely go down, but it's going to depend on the usage in the past. It's going to depend on the actuarial, and so we're going to definitely monitor that over the next couple of years, and we'll contract with an actuary to come in and look at all of our insurances in 2020. So the 2019 budget, some modest changes compared to the 2018 budget. I think the one thing that's important is that we are continually strained in our capital projects fund. We had to reduce the annual amount that we have in the next 5 years for fleet. Information technology is another one that we had to reduce, so for our computer replacements. And then building maintenance in general. We were able to add a little bit this year with the not having the fund fire capital. So we were able to add some monies annually for the building maintenance section of that, but we definitely are lacking in that area as well. The long-range plan for that, for the Capital Projects Fund, I think one thing that we need to remember is that after 5 years, the only funding that we'll have in the Capital Projects Fund is our HUTF and also our building use taxes. Above that, we don't have any additional funding. Building use taxes are about $1.5 million a year. So if you think we have about $85 million in needs for capital, and we only have $1.5 million per year to address that. The November election could have an impact on that, specifically the $3.1 million that would be dedicated to streets and infrastructure.
Why do you say in 5 years that will end?
Because we have reserves in the Capital Projects Fund currently that we've developed a 5-year fiscally constrained plan and spending those reserves down to the bare minimum in capital projects. So beyond that, we only have the revenue coming in annually.
If I may, of course, we're going to review that in more detail tomorrow.
Yes.
And HUTF is the gas tax.
And there was a change to that for the next couple of years, and I'll touch on that when we get to the Capital Projects Fund. The future of Littleton. So economic indicators are pointing to continued growth in the near term. I think there is some concern out there, and there's been a lot of discussion that we're long overdue for a recession, and it's coming. It's just a matter of when. Some people are saying the end of 2019, some people are saying 2020. Nobody really knows, but we know that there's going to be a downturn. It's just a matter of
How can we say long overdue when we just got out of one?
Well, not according to the economists. We're in a 9-year bull market, and so that's very long, and there hasn't been one that long in history. And so that's kind of the indicator that it can't continue at that rate. In my 5-year projections for sales and use tax, I've averaged about a 3.1% increase. If you recall, CPI is usually about 3%. In 2017, it was 2.9%. So it's fairly conservative to align with the CPI over the next 5 years. We'll have a significant reduction in intergovernmental revenues, and that's simply because we're no longer going to be contracting with Littleton Fire Protection District and Highlands Ranch Metro. So in the past, you've probably seen 15, 16, 17 million in intergovernmental revenues. There's not going to be that any longer in 2019. We anticipate development to be relatively similar to 2018. Again, if the economy slows down, that may change in future years, so we'll just continue to watch that. And then the same with the building and use taxes. If the economy starts to go down a little bit, we'll probably see a decline in development and homes being refurbished, so we'll probably see a decline in that. The current city mill levy is 6.662, and it hasn't been changed since 1991. Again, the November election may impact that, because if the vote is a yes, then the city will reduce its mill from 6.662 to 2.0.
So the mill levy hasn't changed, but property values sure have.
Yes.
So what, in terms of inflation, where are we?
So for 2017, our property tax, the assessed values went up about 17%, and that's just kind of in response to the housing market in the area. In 2018, I think it was 2018. Was it 2018 it went up 17?
The most recent year is only about 2%,
Okay.
so what we're projecting is about.
So for 2019, we're only anticipating it to go up about 2%, and it's because it's a non-reassessment year for property taxes, so it'll go up about 2%. And then in the out years, I've planned for 4% on a reassessment year with the county. And then I did incorporate a 3% decline in 2022, envisioning that the housing market might kind of come down a little bit by the year 2022.
But so on the larger way I ask my question, not too clearly, since 1991, if you add all the appreciation over all that time,
Right.
do you have a sense of that?
I don't know that I know that off the top of my head, but I think it's been relatively stable for probably at least the past 10 years. So we might have seen 2, 3, 4% increases over the last 10 years. Definitely 2017 was the highest at 17%. that I'm aware of. Does that kind of answer? All right, so for the general fund, sales and use taxes will be about 71% of the total revenues for the general fund. Retail is definitely the largest at 86% of that. General use is 6% and 8% is for motor vehicle specific ownership and cigarette taxes. So for retail sales tax for 2019, I have an estimated increase of about 3.9%. We have some new businesses that came online in 2018 mid-year and some coming in later in this year. So I do think that we'll be able to hit the 3.88. I did reduce the 2018 estimate down to about a 2.6% increase. I think originally it was about 3.3 if I remember. But just based on the trends that we've been seeing for the first half of the year, we certainly weren't going to be able to hit that. But August actually came back a little bit. It's at 1.13% above last year, whereas in July it was only 0.44. So we're seeing an uptick. And one thing that we have internally is we have a model that can kind of project based on the average of the last 3, 5, or 7 years by industry. We can kind of project what percentage of our annual sales tax we get in the first half of the year and what percentage we get in the second half of the year. So I'm hopefully optimistic that we're still going to be able to hit our revised estimate for 2018, especially with August coming up a little bit. And we have a new hotel online, so that's going to add to the sales taxes that are coming in. So we're going to continue to watch that over the next few months. Property taxes, I mentioned for 2019, I'm only estimating about a 2% increase. Motor vehicle, we've seen an increase over the last couple of years. I guess people are out there buying new vehicles, which is great, because we do get sales tax off of that. So we originally projected that we were going to get 2.1 in 2018, but I did adjust that up to 2.3 million, just because we're kind of in line with where we were last year. And so I think we're going to be close or a little bit below where we were last year on motor vehicle. Let's see, our 2019 revenues are 48.4 million and our expected expenditures are 51.2. Kind of give you a graph here to kind of see where our sales and use tax revenues have been over the last few years. You can see it's going up. There was a little lag between 2018 adopted budget and our 2018 year-end estimate, and again, that's because I adjusted our retail sales tax projections for 2018, but I do think we're going to go up a little bit in 2019. At the end of 2019, we estimate the fund balance to be at 11.6 million. On the expenditure side, no surprise, 60% of our expenses are related to personnel. We're a service industry, that's what we do. We provide services to our citizens, and so 60% is personnel and 40% is operating and maintenance. If you recall last year, it was about 75% personnel and 25% other. That change is because of fire in 2019. We're now contracting, so we don't have the fire personnel cost, but now we have a contract with South Metro, so it's part of the operating and maintenance side now.
So, and the big change in overtime?
Overtime's going to go down significantly.
Right. Significantly, though.
Yeah, without the fire department, I mean, they're the bulk of the overtime for the entire city, so. And there's a pie chart there to just kind of break it up. I'm sure if you squint enough, you can see.
So the fire department, I'm sorry, that was $2 million worth of overtime?
Not $2 million. Are you looking at something specific? I'm sorry.
I'm looking at estimated 18, projected 19.
Or
Expenditures overtime.
citywide, or?
Oh, he's in his book.
Oh, he's in the book. Oh, we're not in the book yet, Drew.
Oh.
Jerry's got his rulers.
I got a question way ahead then. Okay.
You want to hold that question?
I'll hold that question.
All right. We'll address that.
Look at your rulers.
So switching a little bit to the capital projects fund, HETF, the gas tax, is 33% of the revenues, and building use tax is 33%. Other is 34% in 2019, mainly because the fire partners are going to be pre-funding the payoff of the fire leases, and so we will actually book that in 2019. They're going to prepay it to the county or to the city, and then we'll book that in 2019 when we actually make those lease payments. So that's why other is pretty large. 2020 and going forward, there will hardly be anything with other.
I missed what you just said.
So in 2019, we have the lease payments the lease payoffs we have to make related to fire equipment. So we have the tower truck and the radio leases. So the partners are going to fund that at the end of 2018, and we're going to hold that in escrow, and then we're going to use those monies to pay off the leases in 2019. And so the other is intergovernmental revenues from the partners to pay off those leases.
Like a one-time is how we have to look at it.
It is, yes.
So is that a third for each partner?
It's different. The truck is a third per partner, but the radio leases have a different split based on the contract. 40, 30, 40%, 30%, 30% for the partners.
Tiffany, do you want to just real briefly talk about I think it's the truck that pays off in February and what that looks like and why?
Sure. So, jump ahead a little bit. So, the final fire lease payments, one is January 1 of 2019, and the second is February, I believe it's the 15th or the 17th, mid-February of 2019. According to the lease agreements, we can only prepay those on the date of an actual lease payment, and so those are defined dates that we can pay them off. And so you can see here the percentage of what the partners are going to be paying related to those lease payoffs. Does that answer that one?
So we're paying about $500,000.
Yes. That's the city's portion of the two.
It's all, part of the thing with fire is that like the bewitching hour is midnight, December 31st. Everything has to be either escrowed or paid off or finalized at that point, because that's when we stop and they start. And so this will be included in documents that allow this to kind of move over, but for our budgeting purposes, it shows up kind of wonky for us.
Yeah, they won't allow us to prepay it. So they won't. The leasing agreement doesn't allow us to pay it on December 31st, and so we have to carry it over into the fiscal year in 2019.
And why then the two payments as opposed to all of it in January?
So one lease, the only
different
date
leases.
you can pay it off is 1/1, and the other is mid-February.
I'm confused. I thought at the beginning, before we started, that you said we were going to do parking lot rather than ask questions.
Oh, no, we can ask questions. I think if we just start spinning too deeply into an issue that we can't get a couple of questions answered, then we'll pull it.
So we can go ahead and ask questions.
Not
Yes,
you,
you can ask.
Not yet.
We're parking you.
Yeah,
Can I park outside?
yeah. To be clear, so yeah, ask questions, but I think there's kind of a point at which we realize maybe we've gone too deep and we can put it in the parking lot and move on. Okay.
I'm going to go back just real quickly one slide. So for 2019, we have the lease payoff. So the total of our leases, the two fire leases, and then the city also has leases on the museum that we have to pay as well. So it's $3.1 million. I mentioned earlier that we had to reduce fleet replacements in 2019 and going forward. So we only have $800,000. Typically, it's $1.2 million requested each year. Technology, we have 1.1, and we'll talk about these specifically through the policy questions. And then some equipment, and then streets and infrastructure. And then I mentioned we were able to add a little bit for building improvements, so we did that of $300,000 in 2019. But we'll look at those individually through the policy questions. So capital projects, this is our fiscally constrained plan over the next 5 years. It's a total of about $48 million, so that we have identified funding for $48 million worth of capital. But in addition to that, there were requests of over $20 million, specifically over the next 5 years that we're unfortunately not able to fund at this time. So just kind of give you a little perspective of what our capital needs are. And these are just identified capital needs. There are many more capital needs that we do not know yet that will surface over the next 5 years.
And we are now charging this specific departments. Before, didn't we have like a general fund where, say, auto went?
So we have the capital projects fund that is all capital related to all departments. Is that what you're thinking?
No, it seemed like, remember a couple of years
Fleet.
ago?
Oh, maybe the
Fleet, yeah.
Fleet.
Right.
So we used to have a fleet fund. So each year, each department would pay rent and they'd pay insurance based on the vehicle that they have. And that money would get transferred into our fleet fund, but that fleet fund was eliminated in 2013, I believe it was. So we no longer have that. So anytime a vehicle needs to get replaced now, it's paid directly out of the capital projects fund, out of that $800,000 that we have annually now.
So if it's a squad car, they're not charged out of that fund?
No, it's all paid out of the capital projects fund now currently.
If I may, I think in the previous budget, I do believe we touched on the exact same subject. It would be my hope that one day we could bring back a fleet fund so that the fleet itself is kind of a standalone fund that we kind of evaluate so that the replacement equipment is more programmed, more strategic. And but the problem is we have to pull out of the capital project fund a certain amount of money in order to kind of jumpstart that program so that we have funds in its place. We're just not in a position, in my opinion, now to do that. We do need to get past the vote in November. And again, if it is affirmative, then I think the council has a lot more flexibility in looking at a new fleet fund. But I believe that today it's just not in the cards for us to really do that now.
I think the biggest issue with initiating or developing a fleet fund is you have to have funding up front. So you have to decide, is that going to be $500,000, $1 million, $1.5 million to front the money for that fund and where that's going to come from. And that's what we're struggling with right now.
So that'll be part of your priority-based stuff, though, I mean.
I'm confident it will rise to the top because we've talked about this before. Fleet is essential just to the operating side of what we do on a daily basis. So presently, what's happening, since fleet's part of the rest of the capital, it competes with everything else, from street projects to building projects. And in this particular case, we don't believe we have the funding in place to fully fund all of the fleet replacement for the next 5 years. I think it was 1.2 million we were estimating as more appropriate for the fleet, and we're only at 800,000. And we just can't sustain that. It has to change. You will pay for that decision at some point in time. It's just like any other vehicle. If you postpone the maintenance, at some point it'll come back to you. So we know that this is just buying us time, and that sometime here after the vote, we'll have to make a much more conscious decision about what to do with fleet.
Thank you.
So again, some of the 2019 budget request, we have modest changes from last year. I think one thing that's very important is that we are maintaining a commitment to compensate our staff with competitive wages and benefits. That's been an issue. And when we get to policy question number 1 here in a minute, you're going to hear a lot of information related to that one in particular. We have a net increase of 2.7 FTEs. They're listed there. And then we do have 2 reductions in FTEs. For IT and fleet. So I think that completes my overview of the general fund and the capital projects fund. Just wanted to give you some highlights of some retail sales tax information and motor vehicle. And I think at this point we're ready to jump into policy questions if anybody has any particular questions before we move forward.
Just a question about the revenue and expenditures. 48 million for revenues and 51 for expenditures. How are we looking at that as a balanced budget?
So the difference between the two, we're going to be using the reserves or the excess that's in our fund balance currently.
Is that related to the percentage of our overall budget required for the reserves? With fire leaving, we would be way above our 17%, so we're going down a little bit.
Yes. Yes, and in addition, we'll be drawing that down over the next few years as well.
To keep in line with the 17%.
Yes.
So that 11 million is at 17%?
No, the 11 million is at 23%.
Yeah, at some point, we're going to show you the 5-year fiscally constrained plan so that you understand what that looks like over time here. And again, we're assuming a positive vote in November. So you'll see why we're going to have to use the fund reserve here in order to kind of look at a longer term of 5 years. Then we're going to take the harder look at what happens if the vote is negative, and that'll become very apparent why the reserves are so essential.
Projecting 23%, is that what it is?
No, that will be the percent of reserve at the end of 2019 in the general fund.
And that's higher than what it's been in the past.
It is.
Yeah.
It definitely is. But we're going to need it to get to the 5 years. That's kind of the point, I guess.
Yeah, and just for your reference, the plan that Mark is referencing is on page 40 and 41 of your packet. Kind of gives you a review of the next 5 years based on our projections. So in 2019, as we mentioned, we're at 23%. In 2022, it goes up a little to 27%, but that's mainly because of a transfer from the EMS fund that we'll talk about when we get to the EMS fund. And then it goes back to 23% in 2021, and then 20%, and then 16% at the end of 2023. And I'll just caution you, projections are only as good as the moment you print them, because something is inevitably going to change even 5 minutes after you print them. So we're going to continuously update those and present those to council.
Tiffany, your projections, so going back to the slide where it shows that we've kind of flattened 2017, 2018, and I heard you say, why 2019 you feel confident that that would go up. What if it doesn't?
So, just like we're doing this year, if it doesn't look like we're going to hit our 2019 projections, then we will adjust it during the year if we need to.
So we can adjust the revenues, but how do we adjust the expenditures, or do we just dig deeper into the reserves?
So that would probably be a policy question for council. We would keep you up to date on where we are on the revenues coming in throughout 2019. And if we see something that is just not looking positive, I would envision we would come to council and let you know if we needed to cut, or if we had some other plans of what we were going to do with that difference.
Yeah, we tightly control the expenditures as well. So we look at that, every department does on at least a monthly basis. So it's not as if we spend all the money, obviously, on January 1st. So we have a lot of things that are programmed out over the full year. So if we start to see a trend where the revenue is going to be short, then we are obviously going to flag that very quickly and be discussing with council what that means. It takes us a few months here at the beginning of the year to kind of get a handle on that, but usually by May we have a pretty good indication. Is that fair to say?
Yes. Yep.
And what is our minimum fund balance that we must maintain?
So according to state statute, Tabor has a 3% minimum fund balance requirement through the state. But then we have a policy, council has a policy that's 8 to 18%.
We're at 17.
8 to 18%. Yeah.
Historically, we've been at 17.
Yes. Historically, what has happened is if we see that we're going to be above the 17%, we would transfer the excess into the capital projects fund to help fund infrastructure or projects. That's what we've done historically. But I think with the fire inclusion and the change in fire services, I think it's prudent for us to maintain our reserves that we have currently until we can see through the change with the fire services. And just like we estimated in our 5 years, by 2022, we're going to be around 16%. So we think it's prudent for us to maintain that currently.
That benchmark of about 17-18% is a very common municipal benchmark. We've had that discussion periodically with councils in the past asking about all that. And maybe you can comment a little bit on that, just the volatility of the general fund, why that fund balance is so important.
Yeah, so because retail sales tax is the primary income that we have for the city, and it fluctuates based on the economy, and sometimes we lag behind the economy and sometimes we don't. The recession that we had in 2008 and 2009, we didn't dip as far as some of other municipalities did at that time. And so we have a tendency to lag, and we don't always follow suit with the state either. They have different taxing that we do. They have retail marijuana, whereas we don't. So we don't always coincide with the state's income, but we are required to maintain the 3%, and then the 17% is essentially equivalent to 2 months of expenditures for the year. It's pretty common, GFOA, it's a standard practice, that's kind of what they recommend. If you look at other cities, it's gonna vary. Some cities have more than double a full year of expenditures. If their expenses are 48 million, they might have 96 million in their reserves. Some cities are as low as 5. There may even be some that are pushing 3. So it just varies depending on the municipality and the need that each city might have individually.
This budget seems to be, the budget is laid out, if I'm understanding this correctly, that this year, the excess that we have in our reserve is going back to fund essentially operations and services as opposed to the excess going to capital. So is that a clear and conscious decision, and am I understanding that correctly?
I'd say that's fair. I would say a couple of years ago, we were the practice of trying to transfer from the general fund to the capital fund, we projected would be over. That the rise in our operating costs, just to not adding new FTEs, just the existing staff and operating costs was rising far higher, far quicker than we really had anticipated, so there was just no way for us to make that transfer to the capital without a reduction in services.
I think one of the things to also recognize is that Littleton's sales tax revenue, for all intents and purposes, is essentially flat, and it has been flat for a very long time. So when you think about that, it's our primary source of revenue, and it remains flat. Expenses don't remain flat. Certainly, the need for infrastructure and all those types of salaries don't remain flat. All of those things go up, and our sales tax has stayed flat. Another municipality, they've got sales tax revenue in excess of 20%. So, and we stay right around 3.5. Since I've been here, we haven't hit double digits. So while we can rely on sales tax revenue, we cannot rely on it to support additional future needs. It's just there's no trajectory towards that. And then, as we've studied a number of times, the future of retail and where that's not bright. So.
And that's important. I think what you just said too is that we don't have the large retail stores that have been affected. We have the smaller stores that are more.
They stay consistent.
Yeah, right. They're consistent with what their products are, whereas the big Sears and things are suffering big time.
I think that's one thing that is a little different with Littleton is that, while we don't have very many big boxes other than Home Depot and Lowe's, I think because we don't have that, we're not as impacted as a change or a recession or a change in the economy because we don't have those big boxes. So that's one way to look at it too. You're right, I feel like the smaller companies are a little more stable probably than some of the larger retailers.
Yeah, we don't bring in lots of bucks, but we don't suffer either.
Right.
With change.
Okay, keep going.
Okay, so with that, I think we will go ahead and jump into policy questions. I can't remember, I think we have 24 policy questions total. Don't quote me on that, I can't remember. But we'll definitely number them for you as we go through. So we have a citywide policy question. This is the one we kind of talk about first in any budget year.
Tiffany, can we, I want to just have a quick process.
Sure.
So we'll go through each of these policy questions, and those are really, that's what council is being asked to either tweak it or bless it or kill it. And that is what will move forward to the first and second reading. So it's okay in some of these instances where in past years, and this first question is one that we did, we delayed it till the end. So we talked about it, we weren't comfortable making a decision, we went through other questions, and we came back and we looked at it again. And so we can do that, we can process through some of this stuff that way. So I just want, and then we won't be going through the line items, but if you do have questions from the line items, you need to call out the page, call out the line item when Jerry's got his little rulers going. And so that Tiffany can quickly grab that information, and we can answer those questions. But the primary goal is for us to understand the policy question and be able to make a decision. So again, if we start spin cycling, it goes up on the parking lot and we revisit later.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. If I may just add to that. The first policy question is citywide. Then as we get to these individual departments, we'll get to the policy question and then pause there. If there is something specific on a line item within that department, we'd like to hear it then. If we don't have the answer, then again, we'll take notes to that and come back later. Or, of course, if we have the answer, we'll respond. But this is your opportunity here. We focus on the policy questions. These are the major issues. We might hit a few budget highlights as we pause at each department. And then again, if you do have a line item issue or question about a department, that would be the time to raise that. So can I do a little preamble to the first one?
Little.
Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Noel here in a second, but this is, in my opinion, this is the most significant policy question we have every year. It is the wages and benefits here that we're going to be looking at here for our employees. And we've talked at length many times about the challenges that we've had here in recruiting in this economy and retaining them. We've just completed a program that previous councils had approved. It was a 5-year program to try to bring up the wages and benefits of our employees up to a competitive level. That program has ended. And so now we're at a point in time to look at a new program. And so with that, Noel has got a little introduction to what that new program is.
Do you want to go first and talk about benefits?
Sure.
Got a little tag team action going on?
Yeah, so the first policy question you have before you is, does council support a $1,072,480 increase for employee compensation in 2019? This will be out of the general fund, and you can see this number if you wanted to on page 137. I think I want to start with some positives related to employee compensation. So I don't know if everyone understands, but as far as our health insurance, the city is what we call self-funded. It's a little different than fully insured. So many of you probably have a fully insured product. So what that means is you might have Cigna, you might have Blue Cross Blue Shield, or United Healthcare, and you pay a monthly premium for that health insurance, and you have a co-insurance or a deductible, and you never really see what the expenses are related to any procedures you have. Insurance pays for it, you pay a premium, and that's about it. Well, for the city, it's a little different. We are self-funded, and we have a stop-loss cap. So what that means is anytime an employee, we offer Cigna to our employees, anytime an employee goes to the doctor, has a surgery, the city actually pays 100% of that expense related to that particular event at the doctor. So if you go to a doctor's office, the city's going to pay whatever the office visit is. If you have a surgery, we're going to pay whatever the cost is for that surgery. So it's a little different than you would think for your personal health insurance. What that does and what that allows us to be able to do is we kind of have control over our premiums. We're not dictated by Cigna or any other provider as to what our premiums have to be. And so we look at our insurance fund as a whole. There's a lot of expenses out of that. There's administration fees of having a broker, there's administration fees for Cigna, there's the self-insurance claims that we have to pay, and we also have some health benefits that we provide to employees to motivate them for healthy lives, I guess you will. So there's a lot of things that come out of there, vision, dental, things like that. And so what we're able to do is we're able to assess that fund every year to come up with what the city's premiums are going to be for the next year. We changed it a few years ago. We used to have a 3-tier program. Now we have a 4-tier program. So employee plus spouse, employee plus children, and employee only. So we kind of changed that a few years ago. But I think the positive thing that we have out of the health insurance fund is that we have a pretty healthy fund balance in that fund. So what that means is with our clinic that employees are able to use, and with just some pretty good, healthy employees in general, we haven't had as many expenditures over the last few years as we had originally anticipated. So what that is going to allow us to do in 2019 is we're going to offer 2 premium holidays, or premium reliefs to our employees. So we did this in 2018. We did one on the first paycheck of the year, if I remember correctly. And so we're going to offer 2 in 2019. So what that does is that's going to eliminate the employee from being required to pay their premium for 1 paycheck in probably mid-year. And then again, towards the end of the year, they're also not going to be required to pay that. In turn, the city as well will not be matching the city's portion. So the employee is going to be saving on their side, and the city is going to be saving in the general fund because we're not going to have to match those 2 pay period premiums as well. So a little different. We have a little different option for health insurance with the city. So I think that's very positive for our employees.
I can't state how significant that is, overstate. I mean, I've never been in an organization that has been able to pull that off in my tenure. So quite honestly, I'm really pleased with that.
And the clinic is over at the Buck Center, is that right?
Yes.
And is it utilized?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Because the whole idea is that an employee could run over to Buck Center without having to run out to, say, County Line somewhere.
The clinic captures savings for us on just the finance side, but a lot of soft costs that is harder to capture. When it takes me 20 minutes to go to the clinic as opposed to 2 or 3 hours to go see a doctor who's down in Denver. We have people leaving work less frequently, so we see a lot of those type of savings. Things like people getting their prescriptions are going every 3 months, where typically doctors write it for a year, which means we're catching a lot of things in a preventative state, as opposed to a year later it's a bigger problem. So we're doing a lot of preventative work through the clinic, which is over time very, very impactful.
And as you said, soft costs, they don't have to take the whole day off. They can
Correct.
take an hour and a half.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think for health premiums, you've probably heard others are going up 5%, 7%, 9%. I think our days of double-digit health premiums has kind of subsided a little bit. A lot of people have gone to high deductible plans to kind of alleviate the premium increases each year for employees. We're self-funded, so we are able to look at those annually to determine what our premiums would be. I think the other part of that is we did a survey, HR did a survey of where our premiums are comparative to other premiums in municipalities, and so looking at that, we have elected to adjust some of the premiums down. So the dental insurance is going to go down pretty significantly, and then a couple of the tiers on our health insurance are also going to go down a little bit as well. So some very positive information and news on the health front. I mentioned stop loss, so I believe our stop loss is at $150,000 currently. So any claim that's above $150,000 in total, we have insurance that protects the city from having to pay costs above $150,000. And if I recall, we've been pretty lucky in the last few years that we haven't had few if any, that have actually reached that stop loss. Back in probably 2013 and 14, we had as many as 4 or 5, I believe, in 1 year. So, that kind of impacts our premiums for our individual stop loss. But those are things that we look at annually. We look at premiums for that. Do we need to increase our individual stop loss? Do we need to decrease it? And we weigh the cost benefit from that. I think right now we're kind of in a holding pattern. We want to see what the actual impact is to our health insurance fund with fire no longer being a part of that, to kind of really see where we need to be and if we need to make changes in the future. So.
Can you retroactively look at, for example, taking all the fire folks out for the last several years and see what that would have done?
So I'll let Noelle address that question.
Sorry, I can't see you. So we actually did that. It was a unique year because typically you take your whole employee base and look at that. But we needed to create a new baseline without fire. And I'll say Melissa on my team was instrumental in that. She reviewed, I think, 4 different spreadsheets with about 200,000 line items each per spreadsheet, where we manually pulled out the fire employees, all the claims of their dependents, their spouses, all of those folks. And we were able to create a new baseline, and that's what our premiums are based on. So it was a very robust process for us to be able to do that. And I think that we're satisfied with it. Cigna is certainly satisfied that we have strong data moving forward on that. Sure, absolutely.
I think with that, I'm going to hand it over to Noelle and let her talk about the compensation side for the employees for 2019.
Sure. Thank you, appreciate it. So as Mark had said, the past program was in effect for the last 5 years, and to the best of my understanding that I understand how the program worked, it was allocated 5% per year for 5 years, and employees could earn that 5% based on their performance. And that idea was to drive folks' salaries to get them towards market. So when I came on board, Mark gave me some pretty clear directions on the strategy moving forward, that we should be market-based, making decisions based on data, not our gut feel or what we think about things, but actually using data to support our decision-making, and then to also look at our attrition and attraction, knowing that anytime we have a position turnover, it costs us about 2.5% of that person's annual salary to replace, between all the soft costs, hard costs, training, all of those things. So the pay piece is just one component of that larger goal. So some of the things that I highlighted in this policy question we're doing right now in the 3rd and 4th quarter. Those things include a review of our salary grades. So when we did this 5-year program, they reestablished the pay grades to make sure that they were competitive with market. However, we didn't maintain that. We didn't look at them every year. We only changed and trended our ranges one time. So we're behind market, even our ranges are behind market. So we want to take a look at that, but the first step is looking at all of our job descriptions. Job descriptions are really, really important for a lot of reasons. It's the way employees know what expectations are. However, if employees are working out of their job description, that's risk for the city, so it helps us to understand that risk. And we really want employees to be in the classification that they should be. So we're doing that work. We're also, in conjunction, working on our policy manual to have policies that support our ability to be nimble and dynamic to market, nimble and dynamic to changes. We always want to be consistent wherever possible, but not always can you follow what we've always done. We want to reserve the right to be smarter, always going forward, and we want policies to help us do that. And so that policy project is well underway, and we're excited about it. And then career progression. So that's a fairly new concept for the city of Littleton. We have it in small pockets. And a career progression is basically, I come in as a widget maker, and as an employee I can see, hey, I can become a widget maker too, and then a specialist, without having to compete for a job. The trade-off is that I'm getting certifications or knowledge, experience that helps the organization become more successful, efficient, all of those kind of things. So we're doing these job descriptions, and at the same time working with department directors and supervisors, leads in the department to say, where does it make sense, where should we have these to help retain our employees? Because if someone can get hired on the first day and say, wow, I have a career here, that helps with our retention piece. It also helps us to get the skill sets that we need. Lastly, in this work that we're doing is developing a master training matrix. Right now we don't have this, and so our training is really like, hey, who feels like we need like customer service skills? Or hey, who feels like we should do this? And so it's really an energetic approach, but not really strategic. And I would like to change that. So I really want it simple for supervisors and employees to say, I'm a director. Look, here's my title. Here's my mandatory training, like sexual harassment, all of those type of things. Oh, and by the way, my boss also wants me to get this training and this training, and if I want to career progress, I need this training. So now supervisors are having strategic conversations with their staff. How do you want to grow? Where do you want to go? What mitigates our risk as an organization by putting you through training? And so that's the work that we're doing right now to really set us up to be in a good place as we talk about the mission vision work, which I think Mark will tackle in his policy question. So then the second page is a request for next year where this money is coming from. I will say that we've already completed our negotiations with the police department, and we have a contract right now. The members voted on it and it's successful. We're just finalizing it. For the first time ever, we got a 2-year contract, which is really important. It's helpful because now we have predictability in our budget. For 2 years, we know exactly what our cost and expense will be with the police department. And so that's really helpful. And my proposal here for our general employees, our government employees, as well as with their police officers, we're doing a combination of add to base money and one-time money. And the one-time money is really, really helpful. It's a strategic approach that is not as expensive as add to base. You're not paying all the roll-up costs. It also adds flexibility. So when we're looking at things like career progressions, I get a new certification. We want to critically think about that. Should we add to base or should it be a certification pay? Because this gives us options. If we did have a downturn and we said, and we have to face cuts, now we can cut one-time money and help us without harming the employee in a really direct manner by cutting pay. So it really helps for those different things. So one-time monies and also add to base. The first one is a merit increase. It's 3%. What we're proposing is that if you fail your review, you're not going to get it. If you're doing well and performing, meeting expectations, all the way up to high performance, you will get the 3%, and that's add to base. High performance incentive, this is one-time money. So this will be a small group of people, like 10 or 15% of our organization that are our highest performers, doing 80% of the work a lot of times in our organization. And from that, we will identify them as high performers. We'll have a program, so everyone knows the criteria, they know what they need to do. Directors have a way to evaluate, eliminating bias, so everyone can have a fair opportunity at earning it. And then it will be paid out in a lump sum to the employee. It's really helpful, right? It saves us on the budget side. But for government employees, the ability to receive a meaningful lump sum payment doesn't happen very often. It really, really doesn't. And so it's very flexible for the employee. I always tell them, you don't have to go to Disneyland. You could, you don't have to. You can put it in a 457, or you can finish paying off your student loans, or you can put it in a, orthodontist fund for your kiddo. There's a lot of things that an employee could do that is normally not available to them. And so it's a way of really satisfying our high performers. Risk mitigation, 1%. As I've been going through and analyzing all of our classifications, what I've found is that we have a lot of risk. Our policies, the way they're written, on the surface appear to be very fair. It says things like, if you receive a promotion, you get 15%. And that is significant, and that is really helpful. However, if we go in and analyze the compensation piece, maybe that person should get 16%, or maybe they should get 7% based on what their peers are doing in the same classifications. It's also a little bit in conflict on how we hire. We use 2 different criteria for setting pay currently on how we hire from externally and promoting within, which has created disparity. And I'm a little bit concerned about that. So we would like to go through, and as we identify what the roles every person does through the job description, if someone is working out of class, we want to fix that. Then we also want to do things called equity reviews, and that's where we say, man, all of you are widget makers, but there's a problem with how people are laid out in the pay grade. There's maybe compression, or maybe we have a female making much less than their male counterparts. We want to mitigate that risk, and that's what I'm asking for here in the risk mitigation. And the last piece is money for career progressions. I think Tiffany and I talked that moving forward, we'd have departments make that a line item in their own budget. However, it's not done in time. We're working on it now. So HR is putting in the request, because the worst thing to do is say, we want to do career progressions and not fund it. They do all this work to set them up. we publish it, we have policies around it, and then we're like, we don't have money for it. So we want to ask for a little bit of money to help the few folks who will career progress to be able to do that. Am I missing anything, Mark, that you would like me to cover?
Well,
Yes.
with the merit increase of 3%, what percentage of employees would you say typically qualify for that?
Well, I would say currently right now, 100%. Right? If we look at what we're doing, and that's the education piece that we're working on with supervisors. I've been coaching supervisors, and they say, I have an employee who has written up 3 times this year, and they're still receiving the highest amount of increase. So there's some education that we need to do with our supervisors on how to do a review. So when we look at the average, right, employees can earn up to 5%, and the average is about 4.8. So we have just a couple employees who are receiving less than 5%. So I would say, as it stands right now, without the education, pretty much everyone would get it, but we want to really look at that and train folks on it. The high performance piece is why it's important. If we do a flat 3%, the biggest thing that I hear from employees on that is, I come in and I work so hard and my coworker barely makes it on time and they're barely meeting the minimum, and now we get paid the same or get the same increase. So that high performance is really helpful. It's also a tool to help directors to really have to sit down and look at their organization and say, man, should Noel really get that? Or should Denise get, to really look at their employees and their performance to be able to do that.
I'm not getting at how all of these can be all across the board. And so maybe I'm misinterpreting what across the board means.
Yeah, so across the board would be, so the merit increase, we're saying that essentially, unless you're failing your review, right, but everything else is not. So the high performance would be limited to only 10 to 15% of our staff would receive high performance.
It says across the board, high performance incentive, 0.5% across the board increase.
Because it would be, maybe across the board was poor language on my part, it would be an add to base. So it wouldn't be one-time money. That's what I was trying to communicate, that it would be across the board total increase of 5%. Not every employee would receive it, but still 5% would be spent on our high performers. 0.5%. Sorry, 0.5%. Am I explaining that?
0.5% of what?
0.5% of
their current salary?
Yes.
And after you, I have another.
Kind of related to that. So let's call it 1.1 million increase for employee compensation. What total employee salary is 22.3 million. That's about a 5% increase. Yet I'm seeing, a 3% increase across the board for everyone.
Right.
And then the other 3, you said, it's not going to go to everyone. So how do we have a 5% increase in all salaries, yet it's not 5% across the board for everyone?
So that's because the 3%, so we took the total cost of a 5% increase in total.
Okay.
And we put it in buckets.
Okay. So I see, so there is a potential for a 5% total, but I'm hearing it's not going to be 5%. So that would be a maximum. It's not necessarily going to be that.
We do anticipate it to be that, because we're gonna, so like for the 0.5%, we will have a bucket of, I don't know what it is, 300,000, and we plan on spending all of it, but there could be, potentially, it could be less, depending on how many qualify for it.
But only some employees get that.
Right.
The high performance.
Right. And there's going to be some specific details and criteria that they have to meet in order to get that 0.5%.
Then I had another. Peggy and Carolyn.
So I have a little philosophical problem with this. Potentially everybody could be ACEs. Potentially. There are some schools where everybody is an ace. Not too many like that, but there are some. So I thought our goal would be to try to have everybody be in super. In which case, it seems to me this is a counter incentive to just say, we think you're not really a good fit because you're just not able to keep up with the pace of the other folks. I mean, pace in a loose sense. Like, I mean, when certain schools everybody runs, and you all, literally runs, and you all have to be able to run at that incredible speed. So maybe
Yeah, I think for an organization, any organization, the idea that we want every employee to be high performers will drive our attrition through the roof. High performers take a lot of energy. They take as much energy and time as very low, underperforming employees. If every employee is a high-performing employee, we don't have enough projects. We don't have enough things for them to do. It's just how it is. So I think that the piece that I struggle with is when we say an employee meets expectations, that somehow they're like a D student. A meet expectation, let's frame that. That is an employee who comes to work every single day, is knowledgeable. You can count on them. They're not being written up. They're not creating waves. They're doing a job. They're asking questions. They are meeting all of the expectations of a job. We need those employees. Those are our consistent employees.
If there's only so much work to do and people are meeting the expectations, where are we going to get the other work for the people to excel? I know that sounds a little stupid the way I said that.
I think that it's about planning, right? Directors need to trickle that down to their supervisors, and supervisors need to be meeting in a meaningful way with employees. We have some employees who are in a position and they love it. They love what they do. Don't talk to them about promoting to a supervisor. They don't want to present to council. They really enjoy what they do. So how do we keep them happy and satisfied doing the work that they do? Then there's other employees who say, man, I want to be more than where I am right now. I want to progress and I want to promote. And we have to make a plan for them. Succession planning. Right? We need to be able to have a plan in place of who we want to move forward and who wants to move forward and how do we fill those gaps. It is a very purposeful, intentional thing done by an organization.
I'm still philosophically, as I see them just progressing to another city that has more employees and therefore more levels of...
Some do.
I mean, I just...
Carol, I think I heard you say that you had an instance where an employee had been written up 3 times and they're going to get their merit increase. Are we planning to have something in place to correct that kind of situation?
Yes, so we're starting our first leadership forum. We're having it this fall where all supervisors will be attending. It's a blend, a little bit of philosophic. Mark will come and provide an overall picture for us, and then it's hands-on tactical training. So we're going to be doing a combination of online learning for our supervisors, in person, and then these group problem-solving forums that we'll go through, because that's really the piece that's missing. I can go to a supervisor and feel like, whoa, you gave them an exceeding review and they had 3 write-ups. And as I'm coaching these supervisors and asking questions, they're starting to learn and understand. But when you've received no training on it, it's a missing piece in our organization, employee development piece.
Kyle and Karina.
Is presenting the council a reward or a punishment?
I like it as a reward. I would love to make in our job description that every employee has to attend a council meeting once a year. I think it's important for them to understand how things happen. I don't know if every employee would love that, but I would. I think it's important.
My real question was, or I just want to step back and say,
expect a 5% increase, don't worry.
I'm 100% supportive of all the things outlined here and increasing employee compensation. As a public employee myself that doesn't necessarily see this every year, I think that would be very beneficial for the employees. The only thing I had was the numbers kind of didn't line up for me. It looked like it was a full 5% where it didn't add up to 5%.
I apologize for the confusion.
So that's fine.
I will say, if I can, The transparency piece, HR historically has been a little bit more opaque and not transparent. Part of this is that we are going to be more transparent. We already have a roadshow plan where we're going to talk about the benefits, the employee wellness program, and compensation. And we're going to explain all of it to the employees in a roadshow where they can interact and ask questions. If they want to say, what job am I matched to? In the past, HR has not shared that or been willing to share that. And I will say that that's a thing of the past for me. Employees should know. And we may disagree, but at least they'll know and they'll be educated. And that helps with transparency, trust, all of those things, feeling valued.
One more if I can jump in front of you. So the risk mitigation, I didn't quite understand it, but I think I do know. So that is at the discretion of HR to remove discrepancies for, you said gender-based salary. So that would be, okay, well, this woman is being paid less, let's bump her up just because that could lead to a lawsuit or something.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Kyle, just to get the rest of your question, I think you partially answered Tiffany, but correct me if I'm wrong, but the career progression, 0.5%, the risk mitigation, 1%, and then the 0.5% at the high performance, that's where you get from the 3 to the 5.
That's where I get 5.
All that up.
But that's not, but it's not going to go to everyone, so it's not going to be fully 5. So that's what I was asking, is that 1.07 the maximum, or would it be a little bit less? Because say 18% of people get the high performance incentive, whereas this budget would say it's 100% of people.
That's where, but the pool of money is different within each one of those. So in other words, the risk part may take more than, you know what I'm saying?
But it's still an overall, it's a 5% increase regardless.
Because they're covering the butt, covering our butt. Just in case it's every year, 5%.
I have a few questions.
Yes.
The first is a follow-up to Carol's comment about an individual that was written up 3 times. So in that case, would that be considered a fail their evaluation?
It would.
And if they fail their evaluation, they get 0. That doesn't mean they get fired, but they don't get a merit increase. So the other question that I have is, so I like this approach, right? Because it gives you that flexibility to aspire to more. To come back to risk mitigation, that also helps you address if there are certain positions that are high demand positions and you need to maybe bring them in at a higher level, or you have to maybe do a step up wage increase of 5% or 8%, something much more than the merit. Is that how that 1% will be used? Okay.
Right.
So I also work for the state, so this looks very familiar, and some of the things we're challenged with in our department as well. One of the things to consider here, especially because you talked so highly of all the additional benefits, all the soft benefits that aren't tied to necessarily what are you making on your paychecks. So get me comfortable that when you're looking at market comparisons, you're looking at the whole package of what an employee at the City of Littleton gets versus another employee. And I know it's hard from an acquisition, so when you're just trying to acquire a new employee, they're looking at what am I going to make. A lot of these benefits really come into play from a retention strategy. So can you talk a little bit about how you went through that?
Yes, absolutely. So when we look at market, we look at a lot of different things, not just base wages, although that is a huge driving component of that. We do have the capability of emailing, and we do all employees their total comp package, which includes all of these things, my time off, all my health benefits, what the city pays, and then what I pay into. However, an email is just an email, so we will be making a concerted effort on explaining those to employees who are currently here, because they may say things like, but Denver is going to pay me $3 more an hour, and your take-home pay will be $1,000 less a month because of how much healthcare is working for Denver versus working for here. I've used tools in the past like a comp calculator that we can put on a website where people can go in and say, I'm a family, it costs me this much, this much, this much, and then they can see take-home pay. So starting to educate our applicants in addition to our employees, I think is really important. But when we're looking at market, we always look at all of those things. And that's where we made some of our decisions around healthcare. We were saying, what is the market doing? What is the data for that? The 3%, that's where we got it. 5% is exceedingly generous, which has been happening for the last 5 years, and it's out of line with the market. 3% is the average of what all of our peers are doing. So it's keeping us market aligned, and then the other monies are helping us to fix problems, help with retention, attraction.
Okay.
I think one thing that I just want to add to that is each year HR does send out information, did you say this already, to every employee in January to show them what their salary and their full benefit package is. So they have an idea of what the city's paying on their behalf as well as what's being deducted from their pay, so they can see the full total comp for the individual.
Okay, last question.
This is a question for Mark. So when we looked at the feedback, the citizen and the business feedback, city services were ranked low. And here we are investing in our people. The marker that we want to look at is, do services improve? So are you planning on tying that together? Like, how do we tie why we're taking this action, why this is necessary, not only from a retention acquisition perspective, but also does it improve services to our community?
Absolutely. We're going to talk about another policy question of, in the future about taking on kind of the change of culture of this organization and the effort that's necessary. So it's all related, in my opinion, this all comes back to performance measures, back to where the citizens' perceptions about our services. So the strategy here, this is just one piece of it, so that we can lay a foundation here for benefits and wages and have a process to evaluate performance. But then, yes, my intent is to eventually come back through your goals and tie this directly to the citizen and business survey, plus the employee satisfaction survey as well. We do that in the odd year. And so I have chatted with Noelle about this. This is one of the challenges I've given her, is that if the council does fund this other policy question about cultural change, that we look for ways to kind of link all this together so that there are direct measures that the council can see, both for the citizens and internal to our employees.
I would say can I, Mark? Is that okay? Sorry,
Sure.
I didn't want to be rude. I would say the work that we're doing now around the job descriptions are foundational, and not every employee is understanding this, but HR understanding where Mark wants to go. You may be surprised to hear that about 95% of our job descriptions don't reference a customer or customer service or service in the job description. So you can bet that some of the things we're doing with these job descriptions are adding language across the board around how we treat citizens, how we treat coworkers, customer service, these type of language that have become essential job duties because a culture change is important, but we also have to be able to hold them accountable. So people will make the choice to say, man, this is a great shift in culture, or it's not, and how do we hold them accountable? So this is really foundational to the service change. We have to provide the ability to hold people accountable to the new standards.
Carol.
That's exactly what I've been thinking, that there's so many disconnects, well, two, not so many, in this process where we have the citizens who are the customer saying the city does not meet my expectation. The city is the employees. And then we have a supervisor who says you do meet expectations. And then the employee doesn't meet expectations, but they're getting rewarded as if they are. So I do a lot of dog training. If you reward for the bad behavior, you're going to get bad behavior.
That comment's actually a great lead into the policy question here on cultural change here a little later.
And I want to go ahead and try to wrap this one up. If anybody on council has additional questions, you can email them to Mark and we'll get those answered. Peggy, you okay with doing that?
It wasn't a question.
Okay.
Just a quick one. I'd like to do something a little different too. I support this. But federal government, I don't know if they still do or not, had an incentive program. If you had some kind of idea, even if that was major big stuff, you might get, well, I got one a million years ago, and it was $25, which today would translate pretty big. For some for some, not 100 years ago. If somebody has a really neat idea that's just a simple thing that might fix something that nobody noticed, that could make a difference in something, I think it'd be neat to have that kind of incentive program too, whatever.
Well, and I put that on Noel's plate as well, as kind of our evaluation of our recognition program. And I have been part of an organization where we had people who stepped out and did those kinds of things and actually created something that got a patent. And so I think, you can have significant impact through those recognition programs. So I would agree.
Okay, so unless anybody has any issues with this, we'll move this one forward as is. Okay, next.
All right, so I knew we would take a little bit of time on that one, so we're just gonna push right through the next ones. Keep in line with our timeline here. So City Council, there are no budget policy questions for City Council department. The only thing that we wanted to note is that the city did approve a contract with Clifton Larson Allen, so there is a decrease in the audit costs for 2019 related to that contract. Any questions on council?
And if I may, I just want to, our practice has been to pause and look at the council's budget there. Page 52 is the line item, so if you have any questions, if you don't have them today, certainly get those to us here in the near term.
So, yeah, the one thing I have, so the audit just is under our, that's where it's placed.
By charter.
Okay. Other thing I mentioned was the Boards and Commissions dinner at $11,000. Why was that, why was it $11,000? I think in that.
It's expensive.
Was it
We have
food
100
cost?
people. We
Okay.
have 100 people usually, or more.
We actually have more like 140 RSVPs.
Oh, 145 as far as.
Consider the council and the staff and the employees and the guests. And we hired a band this year.
Gifts. I actually think that
And we give them a gift.
when we've had this conversation in the past, and one of the things that we've recognized is that those 100+ people are probably saving us over $2 million worth of FTEs.
They volunteer.
Because it's all volunteer. And so that's kind of that one night of the year that we can give back. So.
Volunteers are expensive.
Okay, city attorney. This better be good, Steve.
Yeah, I ain't short.
Well, I think the finance director's going to do all the work for me.
I am, actually. So we have.
Before we move, I just want to make a comment. Noel, thank you. Thank you. I've watched us approve that line item for 11 years. And we have been told things each one of those years about how that money's going. And this is the first time I feel comfortable that it's going to wind up where it needs to wind up. And we don't have a ton of money to reward our employees, but I think you've come up with a system that will put that money in the pockets of the people who deserve that money. And I also think that you've developed a system that the cream will rise to the top. And that is what will change a lot of the culture in this community, in this building, and it will have an immediate effect on the community. And I agree with Carol that that is hugely important. And I give you man, you really a breath of fresh air. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'll let her get the same applause.
Yeah.
I was not going to get any idea on that.
Really set the bar pretty high.
All right, so the.
Yeah, it's
All right, so the policy question for the city attorney's office is to convert a part-time contracted prosecutor to actual .8 FTE, so bringing them on board as an employee. The net increase is about $9,600. We currently have an $80,000 contract for that position, and so this would convert that to a 0.8 FTE to the city FTE schedule.
And that's the only difference, is that they're employee versus contract.
Yes.
Yep. And that's Benny's and everything.
Yes.
Carol, that was my question.
Do we have any specific questions on that one?
Everybody okay?
Yeah, the other ones.
Mark, you want me to mention that it's on page 60?
Let's make sure we spend a lot of time there.
Actually, the manager's budget is a lot more exciting than this one.
And just for council in general, you probably have seen there's some ups and downs, some increases and decreases in line items, but we wanted to focus on the questions specifically for council.
Yeah, I think, council, if you want to drill into some of the line item stuff that might be a little bit more probing, then that could go offline. Okay.
I have a question. Give me enough time, I'll come up with one.
Yeah, I know, that's why.
Moving on.
Yeah, I thought you were eating.
So, and this probably applies to all the FTEs that you're going to be. Don't laugh so hard.
Well, don't do what you do.
So the 89,000 versus the 80,000 contract. So is 89,000 all in, like benefits, et cetera? Is it just salary versus contract?
It's all in, it's salary and bennies. Any FTE that we've proposed or we're adjusting includes salary and bennies. The
Total compensation.
yes.
Thank you.
All okay on this?
That's what I asked.
Okay, next.
All right, the next is the most important, right? City manager's office. So we have a policy question. And actually, we're going to table this one until September 25th. It's related to the not-for-profit, previous not-for-profit partnership funding. So we were going to have a discussion on what council wants to put in the budget for 2019 on September 25th. It's on my agenda.
Like we normally do.
You will. We're putting a packet together here for September 25th. And for those new council members here, we have a process that basically opens it up here for requests. We collect that information, and then the council spends some time trying to decide how much to fund.
Sorry.
Yes, and so I think we're actually going to be suggesting some modifications to the process here with staff. And we are also going to come up with staff will bring a recommendation on what the council may consider for each one of the requests, hoping that provides a little assistance to you. Historically, it's been an interesting process trying to get to that end.
Well, it has been challenging, and it's one of those, why do we do it this way? Because we always did it this way. So we have new thinking, we have perhaps a better way to do it, and I think that it's high time, so we'll move that to parking lot and go to communications and marketing.
I have a couple of budget highlights for the city manager, just real quick.
We can read.
All right, then we will go on to policy question 2. 4, communications and marketing.
I'm loving it right now.
I don't get an applause. Wow.
Love fest.
I get a you're the caboose at end of every study session.
At least you're on the train.
All right, communications and marketing. Does council support returning a part-time graphic designer to a full-time position? So essentially, we have one currently that's a 0.6 FTE, so this is a 0.4 increase, and 52,300 is the salary and bennies amount for that position.
And the money comes from where again?
General fund from the communications department.
Questions?
Serena and Kyle.
So you talk about that returning as a full-time employee, so can you talk a little bit about maybe your employees in your department, Kelly, and why you have this need again and how to manage that?
Well, we've traditionally been budgeted at 7 full-time employees in the department, And then last year, we had a resignation, and then when that position became vacant, it was repurposed to a position in the city manager's office. And then prior to that, I had a full-time graphic designer, and I didn't feel like I needed 7 employees, and I could get by with that 1.5 people doing graphic design and production. So we were at 6.5, and that worked out pretty well. But now we're at 5.5, and so we're asking, can you store that to 6? So we'll get a little closer to where we were. I would say, you know, as far as our workload is concerned, there are so many. You know, we're an external department. We're also an internal service department, and so we're providing support services to all of these different public works, transportation planning, vision to comp plan. We're involved in all of that. We're pretty strapped right now. There's things that we're actually not able to do. And we've gone through a pretty extensive effort to work with some outside vendors. So we have several different vendors lined up that are helping us print some of the larger projects, like the benefit book that'll be coming out in a couple of weeks. We'll be doing 600 copies of that benefit book for every employee and their significant others who want that. That's a big project for us. We'll be outsourcing most of that, but we still have to manage the project on behalf of HR. So, you know, we've trained some employees in departments who are willing to learn how to use some of the equipment upstairs, and that's worked out pretty well. We have quite a few employees in police and in community development that are really taking the initiative to do some of their own print projects, but still, we only have a part-time graphic designer production person for the entire city of Littleton. So we really need to get that back to full-time.
Other questions? Kyle?
How does that relate to the unfunded priority in 2019 for a graphic designer? On page 35, that's a 0.6 FTE graphic designer. It says it's unfunded.
Well, I had initially requested this be a full-time position, so that's what that is.
How many hours overtime do you have on in your group this year?
None.
None? Okay.
No.
So
Most of my employees are exempt, and so they don't get overtime. But in the case of the part-time person who runs the print shop, they are non-exempt. So in order to have them work more than 25 hours per week, we would have to pay them overtime, and we don't do that.
Any other questions?
Kelly, how much of the work, like if you were to look at the work, how much of it is done internally versus externally? And as, you know, marketing changes and staying on top of the latest and greatest, it's so dynamic. The challenge is, how do you keep either your current employees kind of at the edge and or managing your budget overall so you can go externally when you don't have the skill set in-house?
Well, we have a pretty high skill set, actually. The person who's in the position presently, you know, she's very, very, very good, and in fact has her own graphic design business. So, you know, I mean, I'm not sure how to answer your question about staying on the cutting edge. I mean, you know, I think we're pretty sophisticated in graphic design, but there's things that we're able to do when we create a graphic image for something like Vision to Comp Plan. We need to also make that image available for print, for video, for digital production, and Katie's able to do all that. And so I feel like, you know, we are pretty cutting edge in the skill set that we have now. It's just the workload that we're just not able to manage all the projects that are coming our way.
So do you contract that out, and do you have enough of a budget to contract out where you can't sustain?
We have, I think what suffers is time. When we have to outsource something, you know, we've been very, very responsive. If there was something, for example, that was needed for a city council meeting, like that afternoon, like we can get on it. We used to be able to deliver like that. But I think that's where, you know, the shortcomings are in the timing. That if we have to outsource things, it takes additional time.
Gary?
So Tiff and Noel, so then as far as paying for this particular position, is it because of contracting out that we're going to do less of to pay for this position, the 0.4%, whatever it is?
I don't really expect that we'll be doing less contracting out with this position. I think we'll just try to be able to get caught up and to be able to deliver all the things that people are requesting of us.
And not that 0.4 is a killer, so it's a new expense.
It is. There's not a correlating reduction in
That's what I was
contract.
thank you.
Carol, unless I'm mistaken, the vision to comp plan is a one-time effort, and so it makes me a little uneasy to staff up with a regular employee, full-time employee, to take care of a one-time effort. And then when that is done, there might be something else, but what if there isn't? Then in other areas, I think we have employees that are around for, they're supposed to be just a couple of years. And I can't put my fingers on what that is, but would it make more sense to have that kind of thing for this, since the job needs to be increased because of the vision to comp plan?
Well, I hope I didn't give the impression that the vision to comp plan is the only reason. I mean, I just remind you that we were staffed at 7 full-time employees in 2017 and prior to that, and so now we're at 5.5, and we're just being expected to help out with more and more things that we didn't have back in 2017. And the vision to comp plan is just one example of that. But it's all kinds of other things that are going on with the city. We're really involved with Public Works on a lot of, like the Santa Fe Mineral Open House tomorrow night. We've done a lot of the collateral material for that. Did a lot of collateral material for the work at Federal and Bowles. Santa Fe, or the Mineral Avenue stationary master plan for mineral. So a lot of these big planning processes, we've created a lot of material for them, both the print material and the digital material.
Let me try this another way. Mark, are you satisfied that we need this additional person forever?
Well, I don't know if anything's forever.
But you know what I mean.
Yes, I do. And actually, it's a fair question. You know, that's the kind of conversation that we as all department directors have when we look at any FTE. In fact, we'll have a conversation, I think, in Public Works about a couple of engineers. But I think it's, in this particular case, yes, I do support this. I do see that the need is going to go here well beyond multiple years, well beyond the comp plan. And I think we've commented on this before. The body of work that the council's taken on here for the next 2-3 years plus is heavy. And our level of communication that we're having to push forward here is pretty significant and challenging at times. We're trying to find new ways to connect with people here. So I think Kelly's department, quite honestly, is challenged. And I do believe that this 0.4 is worth it.
So you're only asking for the 0.4, but yet you said you still have unfunded, a priority of having more 0.6. Why not ask for the whole 0.4, or the whole 1.0 FT for that?
Well, I did.
Oh. Okay.
But that's why it's on page, whatever page that is, because I think I haven't looked at that, but there's other things on that page. I mean, a lot of departments made requests of, additional things that were not supported by the entire group, and that's understandable. Okay. That's fine.
My point was, to Mark's point there, that as communities are taking more and more upon themselves to get the word out to their communities with the newspaper industry and media kind of going through a change here, I think it's important that the city could have that ability to take more on and take more ability to get out there to the community. So
otherwise, you end up with a rumor mill out there.
Right. And so I'm very supportive of this and would be supportive of.
And I think the piece I'd add to that, I think, is the contracting piece of this thing. This is something that Kelly's been great about working with all of us, trying to figure out strategies to use the private sector when it makes sense. And so I think we're maybe over time, my guess is that we'll start looking at the internal staffing of this and push our staff, our expertise in one direction and look to use the private sector to kind of take up more of the routine stuff is my guess.
Well, I think if we get into the priority-based budgeting, and if we do slow down, could we not contract out some of your services to out there in the marketplace, so we don't have to shrink down another employee.
And we've tried, some self-serve things. We were printing business cards for 550 employees, and we don't do that anymore. And we set it up so employees can order their own business cards. So, we work with that vendor, and that's worked out really well.
Okay. Everybody okay with this one? Okay. And I would add to that I think it's becoming more and more important that we protect our brand and we protect our messages, and that what comes out of the city needs to come out of one pot that is very clear on the direction. We're being challenged by lots of other information coming at us. And I think making sure that we're able to message out exactly what the city is doing is really, really important. We're delivering facts, not opinion. And so I think that keeping that message consistent and ongoing is hugely important. So, and I've been very impressed with your current staff in terms of the quality of information that's coming out, and also the amount of information, particularly on social media. And I like that you guys are doing a lot of things that are different, that seem to be not telling the community, but working, like sharing with the community. It's sending a real, I like the tone a lot more. I think it's a good step. We'll see how it keeps going.
That's almost like a round of applause. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. We've started something. Economic development, there are no policy questions. Oh, did you have another?
Just a question about...
On economic development?
Yes.
Okay.
On streetlight data.
Yes.
This, from my brief exploration of it, it looks like it's more traffic modeling engineering. Is that what it's being used for here? Because I know there's other services like Arrivalist that are using more for marketing and economic activity versus traffic.
Well, it is used for traffic modeling, but I'll give you an example of one thing that we just used it for. We have a developer that was approaching a retailer that we'd really like to see here, and he asked, because they want regional information, he asked, can you pick a point that we give you and on a particular peak day show the traffic and where it's coming from? And he was able to take that to ICSC to try and influence the site selector to land here, because it showed lots of people coming from outside of the city to that particular location. And again, traffic modeling, we've got lots of citizens talking about traffic calming, so we can take a particular day and determine, are there really that many more cars coming through that neighborhood? Which, if there aren't, then we can get back to the citizen, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to have Public Works mitigate the situation. When we're talking about events, we can capture, we work with Kelly on this, we can capture how many people actually are coming into the city from outside the city to attend the events. We were able to pull data. Peggy asked about who's shopping at the Inglewood, the King Soopers versus our King Soopers on Broadway. We were clearly able to show that Littleton residents are shopping more at the King Soopers on Broadway than the one in Inglewood. So there's a lot of analysis that we can do, and Eric on our team is able to map this the way we need it for particular kinds of information.
My question is this the best subscription service for economic development? Because there's a lot more to our economic development than just the traffic and transit part of it. It's where they're coming from, but how are they finding out about that? Are they using social media? The one thing that I mentioned before was Arrivalist, that they track everyone's cell phone, regardless if you want it or not, and have information on. It's all anonymous, but they can tell you where you are coming from there too, and how you found out, and how long you spent there. So is this the best service for you, and does Public Works also use it? Do they get a benefit to it? I mean, if this is a traffic and engineering modeling, it would seem like it would be better for Public Works, and if they're not utilizing that, it seems like there's a missed opportunity.
Well, this is a great question. This is a debate we had internally. I wasn't expecting this to rise to this level, I gotta be honest. But
Put it in the parking lot, let's just.
yeah, I think the subscription service that Denise is after is really targeted to her function, economic development. There is technology that's in public works where you can buy these units and stick them in any particular location. And yes, it tracks cell phones. I know it sounds like Big Brother, but it's anonymous. And you can tell where they're coming from all sorts of locations. In fact, I think we did that at the RTD lot there at Mineral and Santa Fe, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, this kind of data is part of, CDOT's one of the leaders in statewide technology adoption, the I-70 corridor. And so this kind of data is captured in a lot of different ways. We have some peer cities that have been doing this for a few years, and it's just, it's another data point. It's an opportunity for us to, help what we do, and it also provides a different type of data for economic development communications that really helps us from that perspective. So, we'll take it. We certainly take advantage of it too.
Well, and just to clarify, and this is my fault because I didn't look at this carefully. It's not $30,000. And we'll entertain other ideas, but Eric on our staff is pretty good at taking a look at things and seeing how it will apply to economic development. And so he was able to negotiate with them. We can have a lot more robust things than we've got currently for a little over $9,000. So we're going to road test it this year, and we can look at other opportunities. And so it's just a one-year contract, and if it's not the most robust that's out there, then I'll have Eric look at it, and we'll look at other options. But so far, he's been able to apply it in a lot of ways that seem to be pretty useful to our department.
And it's the $30,000 wasn't, I didn't have an issue with that. It's just when I Googled streetlight, it just seemed like it wasn't economic development, it was traffic and engineering. So I just didn't know that. I'm not the expert, so if that's what you guys want to use, that's fine. I just wanted to put that up.
Google wasn't right.
Other questions?
Maybe Wikipedia would have been better.
There's no policy question for us to approve on this, but I just want to make a quick comment that, and you won't hear me often say this, I would have liked to have seen some ask from economic development. I would have liked to have seen some ask to for some innovation, some economic development ideas. I think that is a huge portion of what will help us guide through a lot of what we will be doing with the comp plan, a lot of what we are doing with master plans. We've got a lot. There seems to me to be an awful lot of things going on that we may not be capturing as well as we possibly could. I don't know what there are in terms of those types of opportunities, but I would have liked to have seen our economic development ask at least. I would have liked to have seen something there, and I think that's. It's a huge. I think it needs to be a bigger deal. I think it needs to be a bigger deal within the city, and I don't think it has been. And I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. This is just. I think from the perspective of watching, in many ways, what other cities are doing when their economic development departments and some of the outreach that's going on, and particularly even with just businesses and working with providing opportunities and resources, which I know we do, but I would have just liked to have seen something more than a streetlight program, I guess.
Well, and as you pointed out, we have very robust resources that we use and track the use of all the time. It's a pretty big piece of our budget. We were going to come forward with a larger ask, but we're trying to kind of control our budget requests at this point. And the grant, we mentioned when we were updating council that we might ask for an additional grant funds for improvements when we're doing redevelopments. But
perhaps the priority-based budgeting will help.
It might.
And support that, because I think that's going to become, it's more and more important, actually. All right, so there's no ask on economic development.
Follow up to that. And we could we can table this question for later if it fits somewhere else. So when we talk about economic analysis, when you present the comprehensive plan and there's an ask for the comprehensive plan, will the comprehensive plan already have built into it an economic analysis? Is it all kind of in that big bucket?
Yes, is the answer. That had always been my intent, is that when we get to the end of the comprehensive plan, there is this economic analysis, plus then it would be an opportunity for us to kind of refine our economic development strategy here to align that. That's always been my intent.
Okay, finance? Policy question. Tiffany, did you want to?
The only thing that I want to mention is we're looking at changing the processing of sales tax returns. We can contract with the bank and have them actually process those instead of having our sales tax technician do that in-house. I think what that's going to do is it's going to allow an opportunity for us to focus even more on our sales tax revenues and working on following up with businesses that might be delinquent, getting some collection efforts going, and some additional audits in place. So I just want to highlight that because that is a $20,000 increase, but we're going to have a revenue from the bank actually through interest earnings. It's kind of weird, but we'll have an offset for that.
Will this make it easier for the customer to file, pay, everything that they have to do with sales tax?
No, it will not. This is more internal. We already have the ability for taxpayers to file online and pay online. Interestingly, I think we have about, I want to say it's 38% that are filing online currently, which is great because then we don't have to manually do that. And it's just incrementally increasing each year. We do still find some taxpayers who don't want to file online and they still want to send in a check. But this is more internal, 100% internal.
Tiffany, a question. I've talked to a couple of communities where they've added, for lack of a better term, tax collector, an additional body, and it has been enormously beneficial in terms of collection and bringing in money that's due, finding those that are not paying and should, bring all that. Is that something you think that at this, within the confines of that department, is that being handled? Would another person be a benefit? I mean, they pay for themselves essentially. They do. Beyond. So talk, because there's never been an ask for that, but I'm seeing it happen in other communities, and it's just incredibly successful.
Yeah. Well, right now we have some vacancies in finance, and so we're reassessing the department as a whole. Sales tax collection is definitely something that we're looking at. Our sales tax auditor that we currently have came from the state, and she is phenomenal. She is a go-getter. She wants to go out there. She talks to people. She visits them. She is in the field quite a bit. And so I think she's made some great efforts on the sales tax front. I think there's room for her to increase that even more at this point. But I think we're looking at that internally, and you're right, the return on sales tax audits is pretty high. It costs us about 23%. Each time, so we're collecting $100,000 and it's only costing us $23,000. We also have a contract with Revenue Recovery Group, who does some outside audits for us. They do the larger companies, Home Depot, Lowe's, just because of the number of hours that those take. But we are focusing on some specific areas internally to make sure that we do have sales tax compliance. Use tax is always a question and a concern. Do you have to pay use tax? Yes. How that's calculated is a little complicated, but Rebecca is great. She sits down with people when they buy a business and explains to them what they need to do. And so I think we're looking at that, and we increased our RRG audits last year pretty significantly, and that return has definitely paid off. Audits take a little while. They can be anywhere from 3 months to 3 years, depending on the complexity. But we are looking at that, and I do think we have some opportunity to expand in that area.
And the percent of outstanding is what?
Outstanding on
the collection.
Collections are not as high, actually.
Is that what you were talking about? Making sure people are paying it as well as?
paying, yeah,
And
and
audit.
make sure they're doing the right thing.
So what percentage would all that be?
I don't have that, but I could probably get that for you tomorrow.
Well, guess, 5%?
It's probably less than that. It's probably less than 1%, maybe even less than 0.5%. It's that whole thing, 5% of your sales tax clients take 90% of your time because you're just constantly working with them.
It's not something to lose sleep over at this point.
Anything else on finance? IT.
So IT, we have one policy question, and this is actually related to Microsoft Office. It's in the Capital Projects Fund. We have been so far behind on our Microsoft Office projects, or products, 2010 is what we were on, and is that what we're on now, or we just, what sorry, what version were we at? Oh no, 2000, what year am I? 2018, sorry. So we were at 2010 and we need to come up to the most recent version. Unfortunately, that's going to cost about $150,000. We have a couple options internally. We can purchase some support licensing so that they'll update us annually or periodically as it comes out, or we may just go straight to a full version. So we have some internal things that we want to vet, but the ask is $150,000 related.
And that's a license agreement, isn't it?
It potentially could be, yes.
Any questions? I'm assuming that this is not something that the new IT director would want to reverse. This is, we are.
No. Maybe I'll be a little more clear about, I guess, really what's going on here. I think we've had a lot of discussion over the last couple of years about two options. One is this combination of Google with Microsoft Office product. Correct me if I go astray here, Tim. Or we just move completely to Microsoft. And it looks like the cost is quite honestly the same for at least the first 3 years. And after that, it looks like Microsoft is a little bit more. But quite honestly, my interpretation of that information is it's not a cost issue anymore. Now it's about productivity and what really makes sense for this organization. The problem with Google is that in many cases, it's not a business application. So we struggle with that. There are some pretty cool things about it, I have to admit. There are. But I think this is intended to put something in place. We just know we have to update to something. But right now, the current status here with our software products here on the Office side is just, it's not where it needs to be, has to change.
So this includes training?
Pardon me?
This includes training costs as well?
I think that internally is what we'd be looking at. Is that fair to say, Tim?
Right. How can we mitigate this in the future? I mean, should we be doing this every 2 years?
No, yeah, I've heard from Tim very clearly, do it and stick with it, whatever it is.
Right.
So.
What's the recommendation, Tim?
Personally, I'd like to go to Microsoft, but.
Well,
you're hired.
But whatever the technology, it should be every couple of years, I would assume.
Well, you update the OS every couple of years too.
Right.
Right. And there are ways that this would allow us to keep current. Office comes out every 3 years with a new version. This would keep us current.
I have a bias, but I won't share it at the moment.
So Karina?
So following your lead of, I would have liked to seen an ask, but I'm not seeing policy questions that are helping our outward-facing customer service. And technology is another area that could help serve our constituents better. Were there any proposals brought forward? Did anything not make it to the table, or to be determined when new director comes in?
Yeah, I think in my mind, I'm waiting for the new IT director here to kind of help shape that. In fact, we just went live today with the recruitment process.
We went live 2 hours ago. I was just saying we've already gotten about 10 applications. It's a very interesting position.
Yeah, I would encourage council to actually go look at it because I think with Noel's help here, a very unique approach here, by the way, and it's.
I'll send you the email or the link. We have a whole landing page for applicants to go to. Mayor's starring in the video.
We're looking for a strategic approach here with the IT, internal and external here. I think it's time for us to kind of open up the doors here and talk about technology and how it serves us better. It's not that we haven't necessarily done that, but I'm seeing this as a great opportunity for somebody new to come in and kind of assess that for us.
And I think having the current version of this is helpful.
Necessary.
I mean, if you're working on Windows XP, that's not helpful for the customer.
Counting on people.
Hey, you don't know state computers.
Okay, everybody okay on the IT ask? All right, city clerk.
Okay, so the policy question for the city clerk, and I wholeheartedly support this one in case anyone wants my opinion on this. It's upgrading and replacing the municipal court software. We have to deal with the software daily, just like the courts do, and just getting that up to date and current. It's been a really long time since we replaced that software, and it's just not functioning like it should. And Wendy can probably add to that on her side, but I know from a finance perspective that we definitely need to get something different in the courts for dealing with the customers there.
Any questions? Everybody okay with that one? All right. Human resources?
Can I go home now?
HR.
Melanie Box.
I'm gonna start with this. I may ask Noel to kind of fill in here, but this is, we talking about kind of the pay, wages, benefits piece of this. We kind of referred back to, in my view, kind of a larger strategic view about how we kind of align this organization here, basically back to our citizens, to our customers. And so for me, this has been about creating an organization that's kind of value, mission-based. It's kind of a shorthand that many of us kind of use here internally. But in essence, this is coming in and somebody's going to help us make an assessment of our culture. And this is labor intensive. And so there is a great deal of interaction between a third party and our staff trying to assess our current status about our internal operations, our internal, how we view each other, our culture. Then there is a discussion about, well, where is it that we need to go? What is the direction of this organization? When we talk about customer service base, this is the direction that we're trying to point to. There's then this gap analysis where the consultant, the third party, steps in and figure out, this is where you are, this is where you want to go, this is the piece that's missing. And so then what is the strategy, the actual tactics over time that's going to have to be developed in order for this organization to kind of step in that direction? It's extremely labor intensive. So that's why we've estimated a 120. That's just based on, I think, past work that I've been experienced with, and certainly Noel as well. And that's the intent, is to try to pull all this together into some kind of a strategic approach. I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, Noel?
Yeah, I think that the third party that we use is instrumental. As you can imagine, I mean, just being candid, this is like a shift change, right? So it can be scary for leaders, for employees, and we need that third person to hear us when we may become emotional or may have feelings or thoughts on changing, that they can help us with that. But the biggest piece is once we have our direction, how do we communicate that with our employees and how do we get them educated? And as you can imagine, the connecting of all of these things, right? So if we have values that we say this is how we're going to operate, all of our reviews need to change to reflect how are we evaluating our staff on our values. Right? I mean, so it has all these tendrils that we'll have to go out to, hence the labor intensive part. So I think that it's very, very exciting, but I think it will also be change for the organization. People will opt into it, they'll opt out of it. So we'll see changes from that also.
So the increase is 120 or 135?
It's 120 for the mission vision, and then I have some work in there that some money that to work with the consultants specifically on diversity and inclusion and some HR projects that we want to get done.
So overall, we're increasing by 135.
It's important to know it's not all ongoing. We wouldn't anticipate that it would be replicated year after year. After the initial push and the initial training, it's more of a maintenance. So it wouldn't be this, it would decrease significantly after the first year.
There is ongoing cost, so by doing this, we in some ways commit to future year costs, which we don't know. I get it. I get why this sounds really cool. Probably something we should have done and probably should do. But my question is, we've got this other guy that's doing this study. I can never remember his name.
Bob Tipton.
Bob Tipton.
Yes.
And, well, that's taken a long time. And, you're in a culture where every 2 years, the council can and does change. And so, is part of when you talked about mission and values and all that, a lot of that is driven by the council in terms of what the mission and the values, the community drive is a value statement, essentially. When we execute that. Talk to me about, is this separate from our trajectory? And if so, how does something like this withstand a council change every 2 years? Because as long as Marcus says this take very long to do and very intense, and so by the time it's done, boom, you got a new council, and guess what? Start over. So help me understand why this would be a really good thing to do and not a waste of money.
I'll let you go first.
Okay, great. I see it as separate. It is a culture for the organization, and when we have values that we start making decisions based on, we don't want those to change. The previous organization that I worked for, we had values like integrity, customer service, professionalism, and respect. 4 values, then all of our decisions were based in those. So when we had 2 equal decisions to make, we'd say what one represents our values better. And so when we, Mark comes to me and says we need to get customer service training, it's very hard. Well, what are our values around customer service? And I would imagine that these are the discussions and things that would not change, that we would never have a council to say, don't act with integrity, don't serve our citizens. So these are things that we have to start building in our employees and holding them accountable to it. The piece that's best about this is when we have a mission and values, in my perspective, just my perspective, is that it empowers our frontline staff. When we say you serve the customer with integrity, responsiveness, then they become empowered instead of saying, hey, supervisor, can I do it? Manager, can I do it? Director, can I do it? We empower them through our values to get the job done, to serve the customer. And that's very, very exciting. That's where innovations come from. To our council member who said, how do we reward for innovations and creativity? That's where those ideas really start coming from when staff feels empowered. So it is important that we have this consistency despite changing leadership on how we're going to do our business and how we're going to move things forward. Not only what we do, but how we get it done.
I've seen this actually align in an organization and I tell you, it's probably the best time I've ever had in a local government is when the employees, through the employee satisfaction survey, is at such a high value that council sees this, and so they see it over time. It's something that the new council will not necessarily want to object to it. In fact, they embrace that. Plus, then it also aligns in the citizen satisfaction survey, so they can see that the level of support coming from the citizens is high. So both of these kinds of things come in alignment at a high level. So councils, in my experience with that one organization, very powerful. And that is sustainable in my view.
Your best time in government hasn't been this last year.
Yeah, well, I think
Carol.
I have to say, if I say, I think that organization, they got it. And it's rare when you see that the values and the mission of an organization and the employees understand that, and the satisfaction level is so high that they retain their employees, the turnover was so minimal, and how that then translated into one of the highest citizen satisfaction surveys in the region. And so when that happens, it is powerful. It is. Pardon me?
He's not giving names.
Yeah. It's actually Shoreline, Washington, where I came from.
Shoreline or Delta or Grand Junction?
Yeah, and a lot of organizations strive for that.
Undisclosed.
Carol.
It's unusual for an organization the size of ours not to have a mission statement. And it's unusual for a group of employees such as these who serve the public not to have a mission of customer service. But we don't have those things. At the same time, Karina and I both talked about, we know that citizens expect to be treated as customers. And so that helps solidify that whole thing so we can move forward as an organization to what we're trying to do anyway, but we're not helping the employees understand what it is we want them to do.
I agree with having the mission and values-based organization, but do we need a consultant for $120,000 to tell us that it's customer service, it's integrity, it's the things you just named off right there?
I think that I'm sorry, Mark.
Well, I think it's absolutely essential to have a third party for lots of reasons. That's been my experience with that. First of all, it's just a resource. It is labor intensive to kind of help organize that. Plus, they're having a conversation with employees that's quite honestly at times a little uncomfortable. So if it is a third party, it's a lot easier to kind of identify for that stuff to be brought out. Otherwise, if you try to do it internally, I think it's much more difficult, and I don't know if your chances of success are really that high. So that's my concern with it.
I don't know that it was articulated totally. Sorry, I always feel like I'm trying to, that I articulated it maybe the best that I could, but this would also include things like every employee will need to go through training. So if we have overtime impact from that, and then as we brand it to our employees, that's going to be really important, right? That it's in front of the employees, that they see it, that there's visuals of it. And so it's that branding piece also that we start creating this culture where we see it around. What are our values? Is there a logo that's represented with it that we add?
For Kelly to do.
That's right. Since we change that hat, right? But there is another.
She wants that graphic design.
That's right.
I'm busy right now.
Are you reading the newspaper?
Carol, did you have a question? Carol.
Yes. Or I had a comment. I've worked with organizations trying to do culture change, and it's incredibly difficult. And probably the hardest thing is to stay focused on doing that while conducting the day-to-day business. And that's why another reason why an outside party is important, so that they can stay focused and represent that.
And Peggy?
It seems to me that we've talked about this and worked on this several different years. In the 10 years I've been on council. One of the challenges with this, in my view, is the staff changes. Because we get them turned into such good folks, they get recruited away, then we get new folks, and the new folks don't do this, but it seems to me there has to be a better way to do this, because I'm not going to be on here much longer, but it doesn't seem to me that this has worked in the past the way we've done it, and I think we've done some darn good things. It just, then we get a new this director, a new that director, a new this employees, sub team director, whatever. There has to be a better way.
Council, I would offer that this could move to the parking lot because this is something new. This is something new.
It's HR, what do we expect?
And it's HR. But I would ask if we could put it to the parking lot, and if there's any way that you guys could bring back maybe a scope document. What is the scope of work? What will these people be doing? What will be the outcome? You've kind of alluded to some of that, and that's the type, I think it could make it, for me, it would make it easier to understand why we need it now, how it's going to last and linger, how it's going to work, that type of thing.
Yeah, it's a good question to follow up on that, to get a response back. So would this be the different way? Would this be the way, because if the culture hasn't been defined in the past, is this the way to define the culture then?
Yes.
Yeah, and if I may, I am really passionate about this issue. I've told the executive team, this is the most important thing that we could do to leave a legacy in this organization, is this issue. For us to address the culture of the organization, we cannot fail with this. There's too much work to be done. A direction has to be set.
I'm with you, Deb. Let's park it.
how is this tying into the Envision process and what we're getting from the community of the values and the mission coming from the community? So I just want to make sure there isn't a disconnect. They should be working together. Not only the organizations that you've mentioned of how this has been, the catalyst for change in a community. I have heard other communities that I've spoken to that have said it starts from within, and I think that's exactly what you're doing here. It starts from within. We can't, help our community without us being strong as an organization within. So I do support this. I think it does, it's almost if we approve all these changes and merit and retention strategies, but then we still leave them kind of loose and don't feel like they have a strong mission to follow, then that can only get us so far. So I do support you in saying they go together, and I think that's something we really have to consider. That if we're doing one, then we should consider the other, or kind of put it all back out on the table.
I'm uneasy about the parking lot for this one because this seems to be where it all comes together. And so Noel was talking about job descriptions need to be rewritten so that customer service is in all of them, where we expect that. And other things woven in there, yet where that comes from is from mission and values. And then maybe the most important part of this whole thing is having a way to implement what is discovered. And so once again, if you have a mission statement and values, but you don't have a way to implement it, then you end up where you're saying we've been year after year after year. And that's really common in organizations to do that, to believe, oh, this is so simple, we could do it while we're doing our other stuff. Yet it doesn't happen, like Peggy has pointed out. So in the whole scheme of things, $120,000 isn't very much money for what we're talking about, considering what we would get from it, or having that focal point of what the heck is it we're trying to do.
And I would agree. My ask to put it on the parking lot is because I don't feel like I am comfortable enough with exactly what we can expect from it. And in the past, when we have approved budget items that we do not have a clear idea of what we can expect from it, we usually wind up disappointed. And I don't want to, and I think that this is something new and different. And if it goes to the parking lot, it doesn't mean it goes out of the budget. It just means it goes to another meeting where we get more information, and then you share that with us, and then we move it through. So it's not a takeaway or
You're asking for more specifics.
Yeah, I would like to see what the scope is and then what the expectations are, and I don't need a timeline. And again, council, anything, Mark's dying over here.
Mark wants to talk.
We've done this just last year for the first time in the budget, but this is one where clearly the council would like a better understanding of kind of the scope of the work, the timeline, what are the deliverables, what are we going to get out of this. So we could do a budget proviso where, in essence, you put it in the budget, but you do not authorize the expenditure until you come back and approve the scope of work.
Okay with that. Yeah, we've done that.
We do that every year. But I'm with Peggy as well as you. I mean, every budget season we talk about job descriptions and all this whole thing. This is going to take more follow-up of some sort to make sure we're getting this thing done.
It will, absolutely.
Would this be built into the comprehensive some way as the employee stakeholder input? We have the citizen input, or we'll have it, but there needs, like as Karina said, there needs to be from within as well. I think, if it's built into the comprehensive plan in some way or fashion, I think that would go a long way to having that, stick.
Yeah, I've got a lot of ideas here that we haven't necessarily fleshed out with Noel or the rest of the department directors. I guess that's why I'm suggesting the proviso, because it's going to take some time for us to really put this together here.
So, because you don't feel like you could have something for out the parking lot, you just want to do the proviso
That's,
instead?
yeah, and then that'll allow us here the next, few months to
It'll
work
eventually come
internally.
back to us anyway.
Yeah, it would have to come back so before we spend any funds.
Everybody okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mayor, before we move on, can we take a break? Tiffany
Oh.
wants to take a break.
No, it's like a budget proviso.
3 hours.
We are actually ahead, but that is probably going to get blown out of the water because Chief snacks.
Not allowed to speak, so.
Okay, we will take 7 minutes and start again.
Get ready for the chief.
are on to page 24, police. Tiffany?
Set the timer, get ready.
All right, ready?
For a piece of tape. Does anybody have a piece of tape?
Not everything he asked for.
Take a little.
All right. Chief used your time up last year, so.
This is your punishment.
Yep.
All right, policy question 8 was actually a request in 2018 that did not make it to council, so this is presented again. It's essentially increasing the accreditation administrator to a full-time employee, so an addition of a 0.5 FTE. There's been some changes in the CALIA program. Used to, they would evaluate us every 4 years. Now they're on every 5 years? 3 years. And now they're on a 4-year cycle, so they're going to be looking at 25% of everything, 25% of the full gamut once a year. So it's going to be a 4-year cycle. So that means we need to be more prepared. We don't know what 25% they're going to be looking at, and so we want to be sure that we have everything up and running for when they do come in. So that's to increase that.
Okay, council, any questions on that?
No.
Everybody okay with it?
Yes.
Well, thank you.
All right.
Thanks for your time.
Fire.
No, we've got one more policy question.
Oh, there's 2 questions, yeah.
Questions on this one.
This is the big one.
Okay, this is the big one. This is to replace the records management system. When we came to council earlier, we requested the Bearcat purchase of $305,000. The counter to that was there was some savings on the records management system, and that was going to happen in 2020. But based on information from the local departments that we're partnering with, we need to bump this up to the 2019 budget. So essentially, this is just moving from our 5-year fiscally constrained plan in 2020 and moving it into 2019. The cost is still $500,000, and that's what we had planned on for that project.
This is also a plus for the courts, because this is how they download all of our tickets through this. So the RMS, so we're asking, please, too, just to back him up.
Didn't we address this as a study session earlier in the year?
Mentioned that they would come back here.
Yeah, so.
Any questions on this? Any
I'm okay with
comments, concerns? We're all okay?
I have a few things I'd like to say.
Breach. We can take away $100,000.
I do need to apologize to Tiffany because she is stuck doing this entire thing because of me. Thank you. She's much better at it,
It's called the Stevens effect.
Yes, I've been Stevenized.
Okay, we're all good. Fire?
Fire, we don't have any policy questions. We do have some
All
highlights.
good?
You're welcome.
Okay, we're done with it.
Talk enough.
So our next one, we're skipping Public Works and going to Community Development.
Yes, because Public Works will take 3 hours alone.
Oh, no, they won't.
We noticed it was out of alphabetical order.
I see that. I
The fair finance
apologize.
can count.
I can count, but I can't alphabetize evidently.
Community Development.
I'm looking. All right, we have quite a few policy questions for community development. The first one we've talked at length with council, it's question number 16. This is the update to the Littleton's comprehensive plan. This is $400,000, it's part of the strategic imperatives. We updated council on this periodically throughout the year. We told you that we were going to be coming back to you with an ask for this. So this is the full ask of $400,000 related to that plan.
Karina?
Okay, so again, just trying to get an understanding of what's included when we talk about the comprehensive plan. It can be that document that we always talk about, but we have, even here, we talk about a transportation plan. I asked about economic analysis. What is this definition of comprehensive plan, and what does $400,000 buy us? For example, will this also be the work on our zoning coaching? The comprehensive plan will change, potentially impact zoning. So is this really that comprehensive?
Does this just pay for Kenton Keys?
Kenton Keys for the comp plan. Jocelyn could probably add a little detail there maybe.
Yeah, I can add to that. Good questions, and we do plan to bring back the full detail scope. We are working on that right now. As you know, the vision piece of the project is in draft mode, so we're working on what is the detailed scope with Kenton Keys. There will be, the budget dollar amount does include a pretty heavy amount of economic analysis and strategies within that comprehensive plan, and it's everything from a future land use map as one of the outputs to how we connect it to priority-based budgeting, and then what are the different layers of the comprehensive plan, from housing to land use to corridors and all of the nuts and bolts in that gamut. But we do hope to bring back the detailed scope for you to review that before you would go the final date of this one.
And remind me when the timing of this, are we done in 2019, or is there going to be another ask in 2020 for some other phase of a project?
So,
go ahead.
So this would be for the comprehensive plan, and it would be starting in January with the draft ready at the end of September, with it coming to council for adoption in October. But as we're going back to the different phases, vision, comprehensive plan, and then the next piece we do anticipate would be the zoning code, the whole review of the zoning code once we have the comprehensive plan. So that would be a future ask after the comprehensive plan.
What's the total ask going to be, do you think, on this?
For the, including updating the zoning code?
Yeah.
We haven't really gotten that far in.
We're already down this road pretty deep. How much, am I looking at this right?
We've spent $100,000.
Professional consulting services?
Yes, 7430.
Yep.
And council, this is also one of those that we can put a proviso on. This is not, the 400,000 is based on working with this contractor, and if things go faster, it could go easier. I think 400,000 is, it doesn't get paid out at once. It's paid as we go. So we can put this as a proviso, and then as those asks come in for the building or whatever, then we can deal with that.
And this is working with a consultant on the cost of this next phase with the comprehensive plan in total.
This doesn't include, I think, maybe Karina was kind of going here a little bit, like the transportation plan. That is not part of this. That is going to be a whole nother, is that under your little category?
Yes.
Okay.
It certainly tie in, because obviously those things are very related. So that's the other piece we're trying to work on, pulling all of the pieces together and get that timing figured out so that it's seamless on the community side of how these plans are working.
I think when you consider it over 50 years, it's about $8,000 a year. I think it's a good deal.
Good way to look at it. Council, any other questions or comments on question 16? Okay, we're all, we'll get on that. Are you guys okay with putting that as proviso? Okay. Number 17.
Number 17 is just a change in policy. So what the ask here is to carry over any unspent funds that's related to historic grants. Historically, we haven't spent all of that in 1 year, and so some of the funds lapse each year. There's been an ask that we allow for these funds to carry over, so we've kind of capped it that they can carry it over for 2 years, because we think that the project will be completed within 2 years, and that is ultimately the reason why things don't get going. So that's essentially the ask. There is no budget impact. It's more of an administrative request from council.
Any questions, concerns? My only question is the HPB going to manage this?
Well, staff
Okay.
and HPB, yes.
Okay, so.
Because HPB is or Historic Preservation Board, they're the ones that decide on the grant money and the projects. So, but staff would be managing the details.
But HPB will be letting staff know to release. So you've got the project, you've got delays, you've got whatever. HPB is keeping an eye on that. They're ready to. Okay, it's time to
Yeah,
let
we have
them
a very
wind down.
structured process for that.
Perfect, all good?
Yep.
Okay, number 18.
18 is a request to add one FTE for code enforcement specialists, and this is related to providing customer service to citizens. So an outward outcome is what we'll have from
Any
this.
questions or comments?
New money,
All good?
spend it.
Do it.
Assume the short-term rentals and signs would be part of it.
That's the reason for it. Spinning signs and short-term rentals. 19.
All right. 19 is funding for a corridor placemaking study. This is $75,000 in Jocelyn's budget, and I think Mark or
Yeah, let me take a shot at it and you help me out, Jocelyn. I think the council's got a presentation on this concept here on October 9th.
Yep.
And so this is, we just put this in the budget just to kind of hold that there as a kind of a placeholder, an estimate. And so I think based on the council direction on October 9th, if you're comfortable with that, then obviously we'd have something in the budget. So again, this is more about corridor plans. It says placemaking, but that was our terminology when we were putting the book together. So I think it's more, is that the right terminology?
Yes, I would say, we've adopted several plans of late, the Bellevue Corridor Plan, and prior to that, the mineralization, and we also done an update to the downtown design standards, and then the comprehensive plan also coming online. So council, there's been some conversation about, how do we kind of take the next step on using Bellevue Corridor, for example, to implement that? And one of the action steps in that plan is about, now doing, diving, the next level of area planning. So some design concepts, some features, some ideas of how, as redevelopment comes forward in these areas of the city, there are key areas, what are some of those concepts and what could they look like? So that would be, taking those projects that are ongoing and any piece of the comp plan that we want to dive in a little bit deeper, like the river corridor is one example, things like that. And we are working, and the October 9th, get a little bit more detail around that as well.
So this is something that I think is really important for us in terms of, this is where one of those situations when we were having our retreat and we talked about one of our agreements with Mark was that in the event that he needed additional resources so that we could execute against our timeline and against our expectations, that we needed to know that. This is an ask for additional resources. This is above and beyond what staff can do at this point. This is actually contracting with a firm to help, for lack of a better term, I'm going to say master plan. While it may not be as extensive as a master plan, but to get into critical areas where we know we have risk associated. One of those is the Bellevue corridor area. One of them is the river corridor, and another one is our downtown area. Part of the risk, and some of these is because of what we're going to be doing along Santa Fe. And if we don't have an intention in our community, CDOT doesn't care. If we do have intention and we have got maps and design and plans, then they are obligated to give us that consideration. And so in some ways, this is something that working on this at this point is overlapping what we're doing, but it can't, I think there's critical timing here. And it actually can work in sync too. So it's not working against anything. It's just kind of another layer of work. And so the intention is that we don't drain current resources with staff, let them continue to do what they're doing, and we're able to continue to do some of this planning. So we can go ahead and proviso that until after October 9th, and you see a bigger presentation on what we're talking about. And then if you're okay with it, then we move it. Okay.
It's also proactive instead of reactive.
Yes,
People
sir.
come in and they're not confused about what can go there.
Right.
They know.
We design our city.
What's allowed there, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah. We design our city. We don't have.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in October 9th, we'll get some of that detail?
Yes.
If it's specific areas or?
We'll get a lot of
Yes,
detail.
a lot of detail what it is. Good. Deliverables in essence.
Okay. We're an hour and 4 minutes ahead of time.
We are. We could probably do library and museum if we want to go ahead and tackle that one this evening.
How come we're not talking about public works?
We actually have that scheduled for tomorrow night, and we have some outside guests who are going to be attending, so we prefer to wait till tomorrow night.
Oh, geez. Invited guests.
Bring us some Red Bull for that one.
I already ordered breakfast. I was planning on staying for it. I already ordered breakfast.
No, we didn't tell Karina that we're just gonna go through it all one night and just stay all night.
Yeah, let's do,
I'm gonna breakfast for all you.
let's do library and museum,
Yeah, let's get Tim out
number
of the way.
20.
Thanks, Jerry.
Okay, for library and museum, we just have 2 policy questions, and one is actually related to Conservation Trust Fund. Conservation Trust Fund is lottery money that the city gets annually. I believe it's about $240,000 that we get each year. And it's very restrictive on what we can spend that money on. So we do want to do some improvements to the library and museum for $297,000. And I think there's some details in here related to what specific projects. So we have
Real sexy projects.
yes, boiler replacement. So this was actually a discussion last year. The price.
I like it. I like it. Sorry, Tiffany.
I'd like to move on.
We had actually approved this in 2018 at a cost of $150,000, but when the project was actually vetted and scoped, it's significantly higher just due to the age of it. And so this is a new request at $275,000.
We didn't spend the 150 though, did
We did not, no. And then the other portion is a condensation return tank, and I have no idea what that is.
It's equally sexy.
I do.
It's terrible.
But you don't want to hear about it.
You talked about this Conservation Trust Fund. It's very restrictive of what you can use it for. When I look at some of these projects, they sound like capital, like they would come out of the capital improvements. So why are we using the Conservation Trust Fund instead of capital improvements? And
So the Conservation Trust Fund, like I said, it comes from lottery funds, and it's very restrictive. So we want to use those funds that are given to us before we use our own funds that come from sales tax revenues. And for Conservation Trust Fund, you're correct, it can only be used for capital projects, and it has to be related to recreation facilities, which the library and the museum fall under that. And so it's just, we would rather use money that's for the particular purpose rather than our own sales tax money or building use tax money.
And are we at well, it sounds like the boiler was already on the docket for this year, so that's way overdue.
I think it's 1965, if I remember correctly.
They don't make things like they used to.
No, it's vintage and it fits in at the historical museum.
So we'll move it from the library to the
Just
museum.
gonna move it to the exhibit?
Yeah.
It's gonna become goat housing.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on that? Everybody okay? We're all good on that. One thing I will say is that it's always bugged me, that conservation trust funds, that it's always been one of those things that we've been able to plug in where maybe we can't use capital funds or something, but it's also intended to be used for open space and recreation, and I don't think that a boiler in the library is recreation. Nice stretch. It passes muster, it'll go. And we've used it for other things at the library and museum, but I would, it's $250,000 a year, and so I would, I think we're working on this priority for our open space money, and I think we add this conservation trust fund in there, and we're able to, it doesn't mean it can exclude these types of uses, but I think we should, I'll make that part of the scope.
Yeah, so what Debbie is saying, no applause for you, Tim.
So that's about par for the course.
Oh, boo. 21.
All right, the next one is funding $110,000 for membership to the Marnet Library Network, and this is actually from the impact fees because it's related to the increasing growth of utilization at the library. So it's a valid reason to use impact fees for that. So it's $110,000.
I'd like to learn a little bit more, sorry, I'll raise my hand. I'd like to learn a little bit more about what this is. Is this, have our customers been asking for this? I just want to know that this is something the community is asking for and that this is of value to them.
Sure. Yeah, this is essentially the replacement. Well, it's a couple things. One is the replacement of the library's integrated library system, which is essentially the brain system of the library. So everything that relates to the collection goes through that. It's all front-facing, so it impacts our patrons most directly. We haven't changed iOSs for about 15 years, so it's something you don't do real frequently. It is a fairly labor-intensive and cost-intensive piece of it. But one of the things that we did as we were doing due diligence this go-around was to look both at standalone iOSs and also at consortial relationships. And ultimately, the Marmot network is the one that rose to the top. Englewood's been a member for about 3 or 4 years now. They're based over in Grand Junction. They're originally a Western Slope organization, but they're moving over to the Front Range and getting more libraries. The big thing it's going to do that will impact our patrons is significantly increase access to collectible material, to collection material. Because you're going to have essentially 27 library systems, 99 libraries that we'll be borrowing from and will be borrowing from us. So it's going to increase our circulation numbers at the library, but it's also going to increase our patrons' access. I think it's about 4 million objects, or let's double check the notes. Yeah, 4 million physical objects that will be available to the customers. 200,000 new e-resources, and that's an area that we've been significantly behind the 8 ball on. So this will help us quite a bit. We need to be with that because it's becoming more and more popular, obviously. And then obviously the other piece is it gives us access to the Prospector network, which is probably the premier interlibrary loan system in the country. So we've been operating IOL out of our standalone library since we've been doing IOL. So it's a huge improvement for the customers. It's also beneficial on the staff side because the system is considerably more state-of-the-art and better than what we've been dealing with for the last few years with our existing iOS.
So the change to my experience would be, so my experience as a patron to the library would just be greater access to information or collections?
Yes, you'll have much more access. From the patron's perspective, the transition will be essentially seamless. They won't see anything different. They'll continue to access the collection through our website. It's simply going to internally, it's going to redirect them to many more objects that they can both search and borrow.
So this impacts you said the electronic books, right?
Yes.
That must be growing.
Actually, all e-resources. So it's going to be streaming video, streaming music, e-books.
Could you stand up like Noel does?
But then I'll be able to see you better, Jared.
We want to see each other so badly. I know. Yeah, so it's primarily electronic stuff.
Yeah, it's a huge improvement on our access to e-resources. That's an area that we have been trying to make inroads in that in our collections budget every year, but it's hard to keep up. Given our demographics, we still have a strong pull on our traditional collection, our books and DVDs and that sort of thing, but we really need to augment that e-resource collection. That's one that is only going to grow in use.
Carolyn Karina.
Prospector is one of the things that's been missing from the Beams Library, a glaring missing piece. And Arapahoe Library System has it, and it allows the user to access just about any electronic or not. It's phenomenal.
And the main reason we haven't been a member of Prospector in the past is because as a standalone library, the cost is significant to buy into Prospector. One of the huge benefits of a consortial relationship is being able to leverage that to make it not only affordable, it is part of your benefits of being part of the consortium.
One of the things that I think I heard when we were interviewing for the library board, or maybe just from members of the library board, that one of the things that we're trying to accomplish is to ensure we're getting a lot of the younger kids and maybe the youth back into our libraries. We're seeing them go to Douglas County libraries or other libraries outside of ours because of the resources or environment that exists in those other libraries. So does this also help that base of customers?
It will, because the access is going to be across the board. It is into every single collection, so it's not just adults, adult collections, it'll be teen collections and children's collections as well. Although I will say that one of the things that Bemis is particularly good at is drawing in those younger crowds. Our programming numbers as a standalone library are already always in the top 5 every year for libraries across the state, and that includes all of the library systems. So in terms of bringing them in, I think we're already doing a pretty good job of that, but we could always provide better resources. That probably is where our programming is probably where we lead the league. Our access to resources, and particularly the kind of e-resources that you're talking about, they're going to attract our younger audience members who are really looking for those e-platforms. That's where we'll really be able to reach some benefits there.
I was just going to say, as far as benefits to our citizens, I think this is one of the most clearly defined and explainable increase in benefits to our citizens. Just the sheer access to material. People aren't going to have to go to Jeffco or Arapahoe County libraries. They can, just with Prospect.
It keeps the curriculum theme all night long because it does.
Yes, I think this is.
All in?
Yes.
Okay. Now can we go to Tiffany? Oh, yeah.
So that's just a budget highlight of the Agent Well service. So again, we are 15 minutes ahead of schedule, and we have Public Works tomorrow night. So
Anticipation builds.
Do you want, okay, let's do open space and then we're going to call it quits.
Okay. Right, and I don't have a presentation or any slides for open space, so we're going to be looking at page, of course I just have it, 177 in your book. I'm going to tell you, open space revenues include open space taxes from Arapahoe County and Jefferson County. You can see in 2019, we're going to have about $2.4 million still left in the fund. We have a number of policy questions related to open space. I guess I do have slides, sorry. Moving ahead. So we have a total ask of $596,000 related to Parks and Recreation facilities for South Suburban. And we have a lot of projects this year for open space, but we have a lot of partnerships with that as well. So we have a lot of grant funding, especially from Arapahoe County. There's a list of them. So we have Harlow Park, a total of $750,000, but we're going to be getting a grant of $500,000. Riders Vista Park to $592,000. Again, we're going to get a grant of $500,000. There's a lot of playgrounds, the Hamlet Park Shelter, basketball court, $237,000. Reynolds Landing Phase 2, there's $100,000 with a $90,000 grant. Jackass Gulch Phase 2 is $60,000. Again, we have grants for a portion of that. So the total out of pocket from open space funds is the $596,000 related to all of those projects. One thing that I want to highlight is we did create a 5-year plan for the open space fund. So on the next page, page 178, kind of give you an idea of what the open space fund looks like over the next 5 years. I mentioned the $2.4 million at the end of 2019. One thing that we do use open space funds is to primarily fund the contract we have with South Suburban for South Platte Park. And so in 2019, that's $258,000, and then they have some capital projects, and I believe the South Platte Park budget was included in your budget book and towards the back. And then all the open space projects that I mentioned, the parks and the landing and projects like that.
Question on the grants. Are those grants that we're going for or grants that we have received?
The ones listed, I believe, and Keith might be able to help me, or Elaine, they're ones that we're going for.
Okay, so we haven't gotten them yet.
No, and Arapahoe County changed their grant process. They used to have 2 funding
they're
periods.
one call a year now, and it's in April, so we've had this stuff in the pipeline for quite a while, and all all that's vetted before it gets submitted, so, we feel pretty comfortable, but by the time it goes in, we have a pretty good feeling what's gonna come out, and so we're comfortable with what you see there from a grant revenue standpoint.
And the money's allocated to the city, then we fund it to South Suburban?
Yes, there's actually none of these are pure us. Every project is a partnership at some level. Some of them include us, some of them include Arapahoe County, South Suburban, Urban Drainage. They're all partners in some of the different projects.
Are all of these projects committed to? Are they probably all somewhere in a master plan? Is there some reason that they're all showing up in this budget?
We just reviewed this a couple of weeks ago here with Brett.
Yeah, and we also said that we were going to.
I understand that. But we certainly haven't updated the master plan in 2 years for open space.
What, you need 3?
3.5. So, from that perspective, we heard what, Mark and I and South Suburban heard what council shared. And so, as part of that, we're gonna move that discussion forward, but we're at a point in the year too where if we don't, we've already sequentially committed to the projects that you see here. I mean, we could take them off the table, but practically speaking, what'll happen is we don't have any projects to build next year if we take ourselves out of this. Or if we take ourselves, for example, out of the Reynolds Landing project. And it's eventually going to be an $8 million project that we're going to pay very little of in the river. So, I mean, those are things that we have to stay in process with. These, if we don't fund these, then, we'll start from scratch and nothing's designed. So we're going to have to go design everything. And so functionally speaking, no projects would be built until 2020. I mean, that's just part of that staff capacity.
Right, I get it. I think, and just a clarification of I think where council really needs to be on this is that we need a context, and we don't have that. We don't have that context of what is out there, what is unfunded, what needs to be done, we don't have that. We have this incredible stream of funds that we're not planning, and preparing for. So it doesn't mean these things won't go, or exactly as you say, that they need to go, and that if we don't, we're going to be in even more trouble. I would just suggest that this, once again, goes as a proviso until we get our priority list put together and council sees it and ratifies it.
I'll reiterate what I said at the meeting a few weeks ago. The projects that you see here are the prioritized projects in the currently adopted open space and recreation plan for this city. And so as a staff, that's what we have to work off of. That's the policy document. So that's what you see built in here. If we're going to take every priority out of that and stop, that's a stop discussion versus a next year discussion.
I don't think that's what we're going to do.
Okay.
I think what we need to do is that this is a drop in a bucket of things that should be and could be done, and there's a pot of money. And so we just need to tie those all together. And I'm not saying these aren't going to be approved. There's probably good reasons for it. But I think we just need that picture. We don't have that picture yet. We will have that picture. We've got the group putting together and scope going on. So we'll have it in plenty of time for release of funds.
Yes, there's that component, but every one of these projects has partners. And so the longer we delay telling the partners whether or not we're committed financially has an impact on their ability to participate and deliver a project as well. So, I mean, there's a sequential part of this too, from an actual just building projects situation. So, and we already backed up a little bit because we didn't release the budget proviso for any of this design work until 2 weeks ago. So the design work is already behind schedule, and so we're talking about that functional push, which is fine, but that's something that it puts our partnerships we have to go to our partners and say, we don't have committed money at this point in time because there's a budget proviso.
Well, we're not looking at this a 6-month program. I mean, we've got the group putting together the scope going, where the intention is end of the year.
This year?
Didn't we already have this in study session?
We talked about doing
Just
the.
the December.
Yeah, when South Suburban was here.
Right.
That's when they wanted the $100,000 released.
Right.
Just to get to this number. I mean, they asked for that, the study session, so they can give us the number that we see here. But at that point in time, we did not make a commitment that we would follow through on this. It was really just to get them to this stage to bring this proposal forward to us. And this comes back to my ask of staff a couple of sessions ago where we have open space funds, we have the conservation trust, we have various other buckets that I would love us to begin to look at together to say, what are we saving for? So these are things that we are building. Should we be looking at what we should be purchasing or buying, or looking at truly purchasing of open space or extensions of trail connections, etc. So I too am not ready at this point to say I'd be willing to support all of these projects because I'm not seeing what we're not doing or what we're giving up.
I agree. I hear that. As your public works director, with all the other planning we have going on, I don't believe, as the main liaison for open space, that we can turn over a significant revision of the open space plan, even with committees and all those kind of things, by the end of the year. I mean, I haven't had that conversation with the city manager, but I also know what's in the pipeline already. And I shared those concerns, and I get this question. So, you know, we're kind of in a, I totally understand from a staff perspective. I understand what you're asking for. Can I deliver that by the end of December? I do not believe that that's possible.
Well,
What I'm hearing from Keith is that they have prioritized. I mean, we don't know what we don't know, but we do know that this is what they said is priority right now. It's not to say next year it's going to be something different to go through that. And the fact that it's, what you said was a total of $500,000 on a couple $1 million worth of work there. You know, I think this is what staff has said, this is the priority, so I'm comfortable with it.
I'm comfortable with it also.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm not saying we're not going to do it. I'm just, my issue is that I think that we need, this council needs to see what there is, and we do not have that picture. And I have 4 new council members, and we've also got 3 council members that haven't, myself excluded though, because I'm on South Platte Working Group and engaged, haven't seen what there is. Our bad. We're catching up to you guys. But I don't see the work there. We have 4 documents that just need to be put together. We've got a task force that we're working on that's not going to involve staff. We've got. I'm insisting that we have this opportunity to give ourselves just a little room to breathe. It's a lot of money.
A lot of money.
And it's a lot of projects. And so that's it. That's what.
That's fine. We'll operate under that policy.
Well, what does it mean? What did Carol tell you? I mean, there's...
Peggy, what are you going to do? Approve it or put it as a proviso until we see the priority list?
I'd like to talk about it tomorrow night. So that I can think about it, because it's getting late. And I think some of the questions have been raised, and I want to look more carefully at what we have.
We could put it in the parking lot for the 25th. Okay, Pat, what do you want to do?
I'm okay moving forward with the ask.
Kyle? Jerry?
Go for it.
Carol?
Parking lot.
Parking lot.
And I'll just add on the open space, it is a 10-year tax and it's scheduled to sunset in 2012, I believe. So I would envision that the county will.
2022?
20 what?
No, what did you said 2012.
2022, I'm sorry.
The county is already working on going early to the ballot to get a renewal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just tired.
Yeah.
Right.
So we are.
We did it.
Ready?
We got it done.
Okay, so are we done?
I think we're done for tonight.
I think we owe Tiffany a round of applause here. I heard time trouble at the very end of the meeting.
So So Tiffany,
Are there meetings? Start with Public Works tomorrow?
Yes, we will.
All right.
There are meetings here tomorrow?
Are there meetings in here tomorrow? Tomorrow is Wednesday.